Hey guys, tonight we're rewinding the velvet curtains of time and sneaking into a world where luxury and danger share the same bed. Because you are about to be born a princess in the Middle Ages, and I won't sugarcoat it. You probably won't survive this. Infant mortality is no joke, even for the crown bedecked. But if you do pull through, oh, it's still a lot. Between dynastic expectations, arranged marriages before you can read, and enough itchy fabric to make you question your will to live, the royal life is, well, let's just say the embroidery is doing most of the heavy lifting. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, what city are you in and what time is it right now? Are we in midnight scroll mode or cozy post-dinner vibes? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born with a scream that bounces off the cold stone walls of a castle that smells faintly of smoke, iron, and whatever herbs the midwife shoved under the bed in a last-ditch attempt to keep away evil spirits. There are no pastel hospital blankets, no sterile wipes. Instead, there's a carved wooden birthing stool, steaming basins of water, cleanish, and a midwife who's delivered 3 stillbirths this month, but says prayers with the confidence of someone who knows exactly where to stab a demon if one tries anything. You're a girl, which means everyone immediately recalibrates their expectations. The atmosphere shifts. If you'd been a boy, there might have been a bell rung or at least some celebratory wine. But as a girl, your arrival is met with a polite murmur and a handful of raised eyebrows. Your mother looks exhausted. She's pale, sweating, and definitely not going to hold you yet, because that's what the wet nurse is for. Your father might come in later, if he's in the country, and if he does, he'll nod solemnly, maybe say something like, "We'll see what the astrologer says." See, in the Middle Ages, your birth is less a personal event and more a state affair. You're not just a baby. You're a potential alliance, a bargaining chip, maybe even a future queen if you survive smallpox, measles, and a few poorly timed power grabs. You're swaddled tightly in linen, not so much to keep warm, though that helps, but because people genuinely believe it helps your limbs grow straight. Infant aesthetics matter. Crooked arms are political liabilities. A priest arrives almost immediately, not for a photo op. This is about your soul. Baptism isn't optional or ceremonious, it's urgent. If you die unbaptized, well, eternal damnation is the vibe. So you're hustled into sanctified hands, doused with holy water that's been blessed and probably has some suspicious floaty bits, and given a name that's equal parts homage and omen. Something like Matilda, Eleanor, or Isabella, names that sound noble even when you're screaming through a toothless mouth. The priest mutters Latin, the nurse lights a candle, and someone whispers that you have your grandmother's eyebrows. So it begins. Meanwhile, the castle is buzzing. Not with joy exactly, but with calculation. There are always ears behind curtains and eyes behind tapestries. A new princess means gossip. Is your mother still healthy enough for more children? Is your father disappointed? Who's going to be godparent? And what does that say about which noble house currently has favour at court? Even your wet nurse is being scrutinised. If she's loyal to the wrong faction, she might be replaced. Quietly. That's how fragile your world is. Nothing is just what it seems, but you for now are mostly concerned with sleeping and eating. Your crib is carved wood, maybe gilded if your family's particularly flush, and lined with furs or soft cloth woven by monastic hands. There's no lullaby machine or rotating mobile overhead, just the creak of rafters, the muffled hum of prayers from the next room, and the occasional rat skittering across the floor. They love castles. The windows are narrow slits, more for archers than for light, so your world is perpetually dusky. Candles flicker, shadows dance, and in that flickering half-light, omens are being read. If a raven lands on the tower this week, or if someone dreams of a bleeding rose, people will say things. That you'll be beautiful but cursed, that you'll marry a king and die young, that your birthmark, yes, that one, is in the exact shape of the Holy Grail. Though to be fair, most people haven't seen it. Dreams, signs, portents, they're everywhere, and they stick. You're not just a girl, you're a future, and futures get analysed. Historically, some princesses were born during sieges. Imagine entering the world to the soundtrack of catapults and screaming. Others were born while their fathers were away on crusade, or exiled, or dead, or pretending to be dead. One French princess was born while her mother was imprisoned for treason, which made the christening awkward to say the least. And sometimes your birth location isn't even a castle. It could be a drafty manor, a repurposed church, or wherever the family was hiding out during a plague wave. Royal birthplaces aren't always glamorous, just heavily guarded. Here's a fun fringe fact. Some midwives in the Middle Ages were believed to be witches, not in the ride a broom way, but in the she used mugwort instead of prayer way. That could go south quickly. The wrong herb, a baby-born breach, or a suspicious look from a noblewoman, and suddenly you're not just the one who helped birth a princess, you're on trial for consorting with demons. No pressure. And there's scholarly debate about how much actual attention a newborn princess received in those first days. Was she immediately swaddled in ceremony, or quietly monitored until she proved she wasn't about to die of colic? Some say noble girls were paraded around to emphasise dynastic strength. Others argue that infant mortality was so high, families didn't get too attached until the baby was at least 6 months in. Either way, you're tucked away in a chamber with tapestries depicting biblical women who are either saintly or beheaded. Great role models. As your first night creeps in, the castle gets colder. Fires are stoked, prayers are whispered, and somewhere deep in the fortress, someone is already planning your marriage. You're barely a day old. You're barely a week old when you begin to understand that privacy is a myth and silence is a luxury. You don't get to cry in peace. Every whimper, every odd burp, every lull in your breathing gets watched, whispered about, or reported up the chain to someone who's probably already planning your future embroidery curriculum. You're wrapped tight in embroidered cloth. Silk if your family's particularly powerful, wool lined with rabbit fur if not. Either way, the goal isn't comfort, it's presentation. No one wants a princess who looks ordinary. There's a small army assigned to you already. You've got a nurse, maybe two, depending on how paranoid your mother is about loyalty. The wet nurse is a woman from some obscure noble house, or, more scandalously, a commoner whose milk is simply superior. She's been handpicked for her health, temperament and discretion, though let's be real. If someone needs to know what your first bowel movement looked like, she's telling them. Then there's the rock star of your early life. The lady-in-waiting assigned specifically to supervise your caretakers, your sleep patterns, and which saint's relic should be hung above your crib. Spoiler alert, it's usually one with an affinity for healthy births or miraculous recoveries from plague. Everything you do is noted, not in a baby book with sparkles and cute stickers, more like on vellum scrolls kept in a locked box somewhere in the family archive. Because your life isn't sentimental, it's strategic. Your appetite, your temperament, your early sleeping habits. These things all become part of your reputation. Are you docile, feisty, always crying unless the nurse holds you just so? That's not just baby stuff. That's potential commentary for future diplomatic talks. Ah yes, they'll say in a drafty hall years from now. The Princess of Normandy was said to be unusually observant from birth. And just like that, you're considered politically savvy before you've uttered your first sentence. Your nursery's in a tower room, probably near your mother's chambers, but not too close. Because being a mother in the Middle Ages doesn't mean you're doing midnight feedings and singing lullabies. If you're lucky, your mother visits once a day, floats in like a saint on a prayer card, and touches your forehead with gloved hands before vanishing back into the endless grind of court life and dynastic manoeuvring. You'll get to know her better once you're old enough to recite Latin psalms and hold a spoon properly. And there are the guards, always there, even when you sleep. Not because you're in danger from assassins, though let's not rule that out entirely, but because you're valuable. Kidnapping princesses for ransom is a low-risk, high-reward venture for ambitious enemies. You're swaddled in statecraft from birth, a tiny, babbling symbol of the crown's future stability, or instability, depending on whether your family is at war with half the known world or just a few vengeful cousins. During the day, your chamber is filled with murmured voices and careful footsteps. No one runs near you, no one slams a door. You're not raised with chaos, just cold, quiet precision. Tapestries hang heavy on the walls, blocking the worst of the wind that still howls through the narrow windows. Some show scenes from the Bible, others display the family crest, always with a lion or eagle or some other animal that absolutely no royal family has ever seen in person. Beneath your crib, the floor is stone, warmed slightly with woven rugs that smell of dust and chamomile. Somewhere a fire crackles, but it's never quite enough. You're cold even when you're warm. Quirky fact, some royal babies had bells sewn into their swaddling to ward off evil spirits, or maybe just to help the nurse find you when you rolled halfway under the table during a fit. And you're probably already wearing a charm or two, tiny relics in silver lockets, bits of ribbon blessed by monks, maybe even a saint's toe bone if the family has connections. It sounds weird now, but people in the Middle Ages truly believed in the power of sacred objects to protect the vulnerable, especially when the vulnerable could one day be married off to a foreign king and produce heirs. And let's talk about your wet nurse again. Because she's not just a milk machine, she's also sort of your first unofficial mum. She holds you more than anyone else. She comforts you, rocks you, sometimes sings songs in a dialect your actual mother doesn't understand. There's debate among scholars about whether this bond ever influenced royal behaviour later in life. Some say princesses grew emotionally attached to their nurses in ways that complicated their understanding of maternal love. Others argue that royal children were trained so early in emotional detachment that it didn't matter who fed them. They were always going to view people as tools, not family. Still, in those long, dim evenings when your actual parents are arguing over land or lineage, or which uncle insulted whom at a feast, your nurse is the one who hums under her breath and tucks the blanket tighter around your chin. She might even risk breaking protocol by whispering stories, fairy tales that no court tutor would approve of, stories with witches and wolves and girls who turn into swans. You don't understand yet, but these are your first lessons in power, gender and survival. Even fairy tales come with footnotes in your world. You grow slowly. Maybe your hair is dark and stubborn, or maybe it's wispy and golden like the angel in that one fresco in the chapel. People start saying you have your father's nose or your mother's chin, and that becomes a thing. Courtiers smile a little wider when they mention it, like your nose is now part of international diplomacy. Strong chin, good blood, they'll say, or that brow could command an army. And as you inch toward your first year, you're tested constantly, not just for health, though there are more herbs rubbed on your gums than most people consume in a lifetime, but for behaviour. Can you sit quietly for 5 seconds? Are you still terrified of the sound of a lute? Do you scream at priests? These things matter, because even though you're still wobbling when you stand, there are already whispers about your betrothal. In some courts, a princess's engagement is discussed before she's born. You're behind schedule. Historically, one princess was engaged in her crib to the heir of a rival kingdom. Their families met in a tent between two armies. She drooled on her godfather while peace was negotiated. In a very literal sense, your body is already a battlefield. As you fall asleep, face smooshed into a pillow that's probably filled with goose feathers and vague ancestral resentment, the nurse hums again. It's a lullaby her grandmother taught her, and her grandmother before that. Outside your window, the wind whips over the battlements. The guards shift their weight and murmur to each other in the cold, and somewhere far below, a servant starts a fire that will warm your bath in the morning. You don't dream yet, but when you do, they'll be full of crowns. You're not even 2 years old when the church decides to lay its full, heavy hand on your tiny royal head. If you thought being born was ceremonial, welcome to your baptism's after party. A series of rituals, blessings, and well-meaning invasions of your personal space that blend religion, superstition, and political PR. The cathedral is cold, even colder than your nursery tower, and it smells like incense, wax, and centuries of candle smoke baked into every stone. You're dressed in something so elaborately stitched that you could probably be hung on the wall as artwork. Gold thread, pearls maybe, definitely something ridiculously itchy around the neck. Your nurse carries you in, not your mother. She's seated near the front, draped in her most solemn expression, and probably trying to avoid eye contact with several people she insulted at last week's feast. There's no smiling here. This is about your soul. You're not just being baptized, you're being claimed by both God and your lineage. The priest says your name, loudly, for the first time in public. Matilda, or Eleanor, or Joan. Always something heavy with legacy. You're named after a saint, a dead queen, and maybe an ancestor who once poisoned her enemies with soup. The baptismal font is a massive, intimidating thing carved from stone. The water inside is freezing because, surprise, no one's invented warm holy water. The priest dips a silver ladle in, mutters prayers, and then pours the icy blessing over your head. You scream. Everyone nods approvingly. Good lungs. That's considered a sign of vitality. Somewhere in the pews, a court scribe writes that down in a journal. Now, the godparents. You don't get to choose them, obviously, but their names are political power moves, usually nobles, sometimes distant royalty, occasionally someone obscure but powerful in the church. The more impressive your godparents, the stronger your family's current diplomatic network looks. These people are supposed to guide your moral development, but let's be honest, they'll probably never see you again after today. One of them is holding a gold cross they'll give you as a token. You'll wear it pinned to your gown until you're old enough to wield it as guilt leverage against your future children. The superstitions hit hard now, because despite all the chanting and scripture, your nurse is also carrying a pouch with a dried piece of juniper, 3 strands of horsehair, and a folded charm blessed by a monk with a reputation for making children strong in spirit and stomach. Religion in this world is a tangled knot of faith and fear. God is real, but so are curses. You've had a dozen people pray over you, but you've also had your cradle turned 3 times counterclockwise while no one was looking, just in case. And the omens? Oh, they're constant. Was the wind blowing east during the baptism? That's good luck. Did a pigeon land on the roof during the priest's sermon? That's bad. Did you sneeze right after the final blessing? That's incredibly bad unless someone remembered to say God save her soul immediately afterward. Some courts go as far as consulting local mystics for an aura reading. They won't admit it out loud, of course, too heretical, but you better believe someone's burning sage behind the altar, just in case the royal astrologer says your moon is in a difficult position. Speaking of astrology, your birth chart was made within hours of your arrival, probably by a monk who doubled as a stargazer and secret political advisor. According to the stars, you're meant to be either a diplomatic genius or a tragic romantic, or both. The court astrologer writes a detailed report filled with ominous phrasing like, born under the gaze of Saturn, and favourable house of Venus in decline. Translation, you'll be married off young, possibly to a man with terrible breath, but you might become a mother of kings. Congratulations. Here's a quirky little fact most people skip over. In some regions, nobles believed newborns should be passed over a fire before their first birthday to burn off ancestral sins. You might have already had your little flame session before this baptism. No one tells you, but the scorch marks on that old wooden cradle are suspicious. By the time the ceremony ends, you're cold, wet, overstimulated, and thoroughly initiated into the church and the world of dynastic expectation. People crowd around, offering blessings and veiled comments about your appearance. She has the eyes of a seer. Her nose is quite commanding. Such hands, perhaps a pianist's. You're too young to even focus properly, and already you're being speculated on like a horse at auction. The feast afterward is grand, roasted boar, pies shaped like swans, sugared fruits from some warmer land you'll never see. But you don't attend. You're back in your nursery, dressed in fresh linens, chewing on a carved wooden rattle that's likely been blessed, polished, and possibly stolen from the treasury. Outside, the nobility toasts your name. You're not old enough to walk, but you've already made a dozen political ripples just by existing. There's some scholarly debate about whether all princesses in medieval Europe went through these lavish baptism rituals, or if it was more common for only heirs and very high-ranking daughters. Some records suggest that during times of war or plague, baptisms were rushed or even handled by midwives, technically valid, though not nearly as photogenic for the frescoes. Others argue that even during chaos, royal girls received the full treatment because of what they represented: continuity, alliance, legacy. You, in particular, are too valuable to skimp on symbolism. That night you're tucked into your cradle with a soft cloth over your brow to keep your humours in balance. Your wet nurse is still muttering about the pigeon from earlier. She's convinced it's a bad omen. The lady-in-waiting assures her it's fine, but she doesn't sound convinced. She's already planning a visit to a shrine in the next village. You don't know it yet, but your every milestone from now on will be dissected like this. Your first steps will be a sign of leadership. Your first words will be compared to saints or queens. Your teething schedule might be tracked on a scroll in the monastery archives. You are never just a child. You are a mirror for everyone's expectations, fears, and ambitions. Outside your tower, the castle continues its endless breathing. Fires lit, guards rotated, dogs barking in the distance. Inside, your breath slows. The candles flicker. You sleep, still damp from holy water wrapped in prophecy. Your name echoes through the halls long before you understand it belongs to you. At first, it's just a sound. Matilda, Eleanor, Joan, or maybe something even grander, stitched into the fabric of saints and scandals alike. You learn it slowly, by hearing it whispered over you when you sleep, hissed when you're about to touch something you shouldn't, or sung softly by the wet nurse who seems to know more about who you are than you do. But here's the thing about names in the Middle Ages. They're not just names, they're statements. Weapons, sometimes. You don't just inherit a title, you inherit an identity with a lineage like a dagger pointed outward. Your name was debated for weeks before you were born, or at least before they knew you were a girl. Had you been a boy, the list would have been shorter, something heavy and kingly like Henry or William or Charles. But for a girl, the name has to do more. It needs to strike a balance between delicate and formidable, something that can be sewn into treaties and still whispered in a lover's ear without sounding like a battle cry. They likely settled on a name linked to a grandmother who once ruled as regent while her husband was off failing a crusade, or to a saint who died slowly but with perfect posture. Of course, no one calls you by your full name unless they're reading it off a scroll or announcing you at a feast. Around the nursery it's shortened into something less grand. Ellie, Tilda, Joni. Your nurse uses it like a thread, weaving it into lullabies and warnings. But when you're dressed for formal appearances, or worse, for portraits, you're referred to in full, sometimes with princess in front, sometimes with your father's titles trailing behind like a cape. You're not just Matilda, you're Matilda of House Whatever, daughter of His Grace, a tiny mouthpiece for your family's ambitions, and that name is already being recorded. Monks in the chapel are copying it into illuminated manuscripts, probably with a little too much artistic license. A capital M that looks like a mountain, gold leaf glinting in the margins, your name, your existence, being slowly etched into eternity by men who'll never speak to you directly. One day, someone will read that name and assume they know who you were. They won't, but the name will outlive everything else. Historically, names like yours were chosen to evoke specific qualities or signal family alliances. If you're named after a saint, it's a call for divine protection. If you're named after a powerful matriarch, it's a warning to potential enemies. And if you're named after a foreign queen, it might be a hint, subtle or not, that your family wants to rekindle some long-dormant alliance. People will read into it, no matter what. Even the pronunciation matters. One misplaced syllable could signal you're not from around here, or worse, that you're from exactly where the current war is happening. Your name becomes part of your wardrobe, You wear it with your cloak and veil stitched into the hem of your underdress, pressed into the wax seals of the letters your mother writes on your behalf. People will make assumptions based on your name before they even see your face. Oh, she's a Matilda? Then she must be clever. A Joan? Stubborn, that one. It's like being born into a role in a very intense, very high-stakes play, and the script was written before you arrived. Here's a weird fringe detail. In some royal courts, names were chosen based on lunar phases. If you were born during a waning moon, your name might be picked from a list of martyrs. Full moon, maybe a name tied to fertility goddesses or saints associated with childbirth. Sounds random, right? But in a world where comets are omens and sneezes can curse a marriage, naming becomes part science, part superstition, part what will make this kid sound like they could run a kingdom without crying. By the time you're 3 or 4, assuming you survive the usual childhood threats of fever, accident and general medieval chaos, you've already been told the story of your name 100 times. It's not the real story, of course. The real story involves negotiation, politics, and several passive-aggressive family arguments. But the version you hear is the soft, bedtime-friendly one. You were named after your great-grandmother, who once held off an invading army by standing on the castle walls in her nightdress. No pressure. There's debate among historians about how much input royal mothers had in naming their daughters. Some say queens had full control over naming, especially if the child wasn't the heir. Others argue that naming was a joint decision, with final approval going to the king or even the royal council. A few accounts suggest that certain powerful noblewomen essentially named the children themselves as part of their godparent duties, claiming naming rights like a prize in the endless game of court influence. Either way, your name came with strings, and probably a few veiled threats. And of course, if you're particularly unlucky, or particularly significant, you may receive more names as you get older. New titles, epithets, descriptors like the fair, the wise, or the mild, though no one ever really wants to be the mild. That's basically medieval for, well, she was there. Later in life, your name might be tied to a location, of Aquitaine, of Castile, of Anjou. You're not just you, you're where you come from and where you're sent. That little "of" carries a whole world of implication. Property, allegiance, marital status, everything that matters. In court, your name is both shield and weapon. You can be introduced with grandeur. Her Royal Highness, Princess Eleanor of the House of Valois, Defender of the Faith, and Light of the Western Marches. But behind your back, people might call you Little Ella, or worse, the Spare. There's always another nickname in the shadows, and not all of them are flattering. Still, you learn to own it. Your name becomes the first tool in your tiny arsenal. You practice writing it, badly, on wax tablets, and your tutor gently corrects your letters while muttering about your stubborn grip. You learn to announce yourself properly, to bow your head just slightly as you say it, like it's a holy word. Because in a way it is. You're not just a child, you're a story waiting to be told, and your name is the title page, written in gold, lined with thorns. There's no such thing as playtime, not the way you'd imagine it anyway. No toy chests exploding with colour, no squeaky plush animals, no make-believe princess dresses because, well, you are the make-believe. Your days are scheduled like a miniature diplomat's, and even the things that pass for toys are somehow preparing you for life as someone else's ceremonial accessory. You have a wooden doll, yes, but she's not for tea parties. She's there to teach you how to hold yourself, how to smooth a gown just so, how to bow a wooden head when receiving guests that only exist in your imagination. And she's probably not alone. You've also got a carved horse, a set of tiny figurines dressed like saints, and maybe a painted board with letters to trace, though it'll be years before anyone expects you to write your own name perfectly. Your favourite toy is a small embroidered cushion that you like to bite. It has gold thread, and probably took someone 3 weeks to stitch, but to you, it tastes like importance. Your nurse lets you keep it under your pillow, despite warnings that it might spoil your discipline. From a shockingly young age, your days revolve around lessons. Not A is for apple type lessons, More like A is for allegiance, B is for betrothal, and C is for courtly conduct. Your first real tutor is a priest with sleepy eyes and the distinct smell of parchment. He doesn't smile often, but when you manage to repeat a phrase of Latin correctly, something about the Virgin Mary suffering nobly, he nods with a pride that's almost paternal. Almost. You sit very still on a hard bench while he murmurs prayers and grammar rules, and you try not to squirm even though your dress is itchy and your legs have gone numb. And when you're not with him, you're being supervised by a stern lady who is somehow always 2 steps behind you, no matter how silently you try to escape across the stone floor. She's the one in charge of teaching you posture. That is, how to walk like you're not actually touching the ground. You're told to keep your chin up, shoulders back, and hands folded neatly in front of you, like you're always moments away from being immortalized in stained glass. At first, you fall down a lot. Eventually you stop crying when you do. You eat in silence, or at least in careful moderation. Children are expected to listen, not speak, and certainly not giggle when the nobleman 3 chairs down drops a piece of venison into his lap. You do laugh once, just once. The room goes silent and your mother gives you a look that feels like winter. Later the nurse explains that princesses laugh softly, and only when it benefits the mood. Apparently your laugh wasn't diplomatic enough. Historically, princesses began formal training in etiquette around age 3 or 4. That's when the expectations shift. You're no longer just surviving infancy. You're now being shaped into someone who could plausibly host a foreign emissary by the time she's 8. If your family's wealthy enough, a governess is brought in. A woman who knows 3 languages and can silence a room with a single raised eyebrow. She takes one look at you and decides you're a project. From that day on, your doll gets placed on a shelf, and your lessons are divided between language, religion, and the precise way to lower your eyes when a man twice your age makes a joke you don't understand. And that's not all. You're also expected to learn embroidery, because nothing says future queen like the ability to perfectly replicate a falcon on a handkerchief. At first, you stab your finger more than the cloth. Blood happens. You're told to keep going. The cloth absorbs the stain. Eventually your stitches become steady enough to impress the old nun who oversees your handiwork. She tells you that women who sew patiently are better mothers. You don't question it. She's the only one who ever praises you with cookies. Here's a strange little fringe fact. In some courts, noble girls were taught to create their own sigils in thread. Miniature coat of arms-like designs to represent their personality. You're told to design one. You choose a rose with a dagger behind it. Your governess raises an eyebrow. Symbolism is bold, she murmurs, but she lets you keep it. You're allowed some fresh air each day, under strict supervision of course, a walled garden, gravel paths, birds you're not allowed to chase. You learn to walk gracefully on cobblestones in shoes that are more decorative than practical. The first time you fall, your nurse helps you up, wipes your dress, and whispers that no one important saw it. Later, she smuggles you a plum as a reward for walking like someone who owns the place. You do, technically, but ownership doesn't mean freedom. There's debate among historians about how much free playtime princesses were allowed. Some records suggest royal girls played courtly games with other noble children, mock feasts, dress rehearsals, even polite tournaments where instead of swords they wielded compliments. Others say that by age 5 their schedules were so rigid that even an hour of unstructured time was considered dangerous to their development. The truth is probably in the middle. You get to play, but your play is always being watched, interpreted, compared. You have no real friends yet. Maybe a maid who sneaks you sugar-dusted almonds when your governess isn't looking. Maybe the kitchen boy who pulls faces at you from behind the soup pot, but you're being trained to see everyone as a step on a ladder or a rung beneath you. Friendship? That's for girls who don't have territories riding on their engagement, and you're beginning to understand that. Just a little. When you overhear a conversation in the hall about your cousin being shipped off to a kingdom you can't even find on the map, you suddenly feel cold. You don't know where you'll be shipped off to yet, but you know it's not up to you. For now, you sit in your carved wooden chair, hands in your lap, posture perfect, trying to remember the Latin word for obedience. Outside, winter presses against the windows like a waiting guest. Inside, your tutor adjusts your hem and asks if you remember the difference between dominus and domina. You nod. You say the words. You're learning how to rule, but only from a seat slightly to the left of the throne. Meals are supposed to be a comfort, a daily pleasure, a break from the stiff routines of court, but not for you. You're a princess, which means eating is just another lesson wrapped in complicated layers of expectation, silverware and silent judgment. Your first memories of food aren't of flavours or favourite dishes, but of rules. Don't slurp, don't reach, don't wipe your hands on your dress, even if the pomegranate sauce is slowly dripping down your fingers and staining your cuffs like a crime scene. Food is not about hunger, it's about discipline, and appearances, always appearances. You sit at the side of the long creaking table, in a miniature high-back chair made just for you. It's uncomfortable, and you suspect that's part of the design. A reminder that nothing about royalty is meant to be soft. Your plate is pewter, though you've seen your father and mother eat from silver. You'll graduate to silver when you learn not to drop it. That warning came from your governess, delivered with her usual smirk and a piece of dry bread that you chewed like it was a personal insult. Your meals are served in courses, even though you don't fully understand what a course is yet. It just means the plates keep coming and the food keeps changing, and you're expected to show polite interest in everything, even the things that smell like regret. A bowl of thick barley gruel is placed in front of you first. It's beige, lumpy, and hot enough to steam your eyebrows. You try to smile. The cook is watching from the doorway, hoping the little royal approves of her peasant chic creation. You don't hate it, but you also don't know how to say that, so you nod solemnly, like you're blessing it. Then comes something more indulgent. A honeyed meat pie, the crust still warm and glossy, the filling suspicious. It might be lamb or pigeon, or something no one wants to name. You've learned that the fancier the meat, the more likely it is to have once walked on two legs and looked you in the eye. You eat it anyway, everyone's watching. The pie tastes like cinnamon and indecision. Royal food is seasonal and subject to whatever the local land can produce, meaning your diet is at the mercy of weather, harvests, and whether or not your father has angered the grain guild again. Summer brings fresh fruits, cherries, apples, plums, and sweet wines that you're allowed to taste barely. Winter is turnips, endless turnips, turnip stew, roasted turnips, mashed turnips so aggressively seasoned with pepper that your mouth tingles for hours. There's a rumour among the scullery maids that one of the Queen's cousins died of turnip-related melancholy. You think about that every time it shows up on your plate. Here's the thing, your royal status doesn't mean the food is good, it just means it's fancier. More spices, more sauces, more layers, but more doesn't always mean better. You've had pies that looked like works of art and tasted like the inside of a shoe. There's a fish dish that shows up often at feasts, decorated with almond paste and raisins, which you're told is a delicacy. You call it the sad fish, and only eat the raisins when no one's looking. One fringe fact you'd never guess. In some medieval courts, food wasn't just served, it was performed, literally. Entire dishes were designed to be theatrical. Swans redressed in their own feathers and brought out flaming pies that exploded with live birds or frogs, and even moulded sugar castles that melted under warm sauces. You haven't seen those yet, but you've heard about them in bedtime stories. You wonder if it's true, and more importantly, if the birds ever escaped. Of course, every meal is an event. You don't just sit and eat. You observe, you practice, you memorize the order of spoons. You nod at the correct moments during conversation you don't understand. You listen to the clink of cups and the quiet murmur of your father discussing borders and taxes while your mother pretends not to be bored. You learn the art of tasting, not eating. You learn that food is never just food. It's politics in pastry form. There's scholarly debate about whether royal children had separate meals from their parents or were expected to dine with the court. Some accounts suggest that young princesses were fed in nursery chambers by nurses until they were old enough to handle themselves in public, while others describe miniature versions of formal banquets, with all the rules intact and none of the fun. Either way, your experience leans toward the latter. You're expected to be present, even when the food is overwhelming and your feet don't touch the ground. And then there are the fasting days. You don't eat meat, or dairy, or anything remotely cheerful. Fish is allowed, but not the good kind. Your governess says fasting is good for the soul. You think it's just an excuse to serve sad porridge, but you nod, fold your hands and chew quietly, because you're learning that refusal can be interpreted as rebellion. And rebellion, even in tiny spoonfuls, has consequences. Mealtime also comes with table prayers, long and elaborate. You're required to bow your head and keep it bowed, even when the smell of food is making your stomach stage a revolution. You accidentally open your eyes once and catch your father staring into space. He doesn't seem particularly prayerful. Still, the ritual matters. The optics matter. God is always watching, even if everyone else has started cutting into their roast. Your favourite treat, when it finally comes, is a wafer-thin piece of sweetened bread brushed with rosewater and sprinkled with ground almonds. It shows up maybe once a week, passed to you quietly after a particularly long bout of needlework or a successful Latin recitation. You bite into it slowly, savouring each crumb like it's a promise. The flavour lingers on your tongue all afternoon, and just as you think you might escape the table with your dignity intact, a servant appears with a damp cloth for your hands. You're expected to dab, not wipe. Dabbing is elegant. Wiping is for peasants. You follow the script, your face expressionless, your manners rehearsed. You're 5, maybe 6, and you already know that even crumbs can become court gossip. Later, you return to your room and lie on your bed, stomach full, mind buzzing. You stare at the wooden beams above you and think about pies shaped like animals and raisins that used to be fish eyes. And somewhere deep down, beneath the etiquette and embroidered linens, you're starting to understand that hunger isn't just for food. You're starving for freedom, for flavour that surprises you, for a meal you can eat with your fingers, with no one watching. But that's not today. Today, you eat like a princess, which means carefully, politely, and never enough to feel satisfied. You learn your first foreign word before you fully master your own name. Avenue Latin, smooth and serious on the tongue. It slips out of your mouth like a secret and earns you a rare smile from your tutor, who smells like wax and carries a quill behind one ear like a permanent accessory. He's not the sort to giggle or clap, but when you repeat Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus with only 2 syllables tangled, he nods approvingly and lets you pick your seat for the rest of the day. You choose the stool by the window. It's cold and splintery, but from there you can see a sliver of sky, and that feels like victory. Your days now begin not with lullabies, but with Latin verbs. The church wants you fluent, or at least fluent enough to fake piety convincingly. Grammar lessons are woven into your stitching time. Psalms are sung while your hair is combed. You recite prayers while standing still, arms stiff at your sides, like a very holy statue that occasionally sneezes. Language is more than a tool here. It's a test. Your intelligence, your discipline, your usefulness to the court are all measured in your ability to conjugate esse without collapsing into tears. Not that anyone cares if you cry. Your governess watches like a hawk, ready to correct your tone if your blessed sounds too much like bothered. If your voice trembles, she calls it a learning moment. You grit your teeth and try again. After all, this is what's expected of a princess, to sound divine even when your throat is raw from morning drills and your stomach is still churning from last night's turnip stew. And Latin is just the beginning. Soon comes French, the language of the court, the language of love and land disputes. You hear it spoken around you constantly, by nobles flirting, by your mother when she's annoyed and wants to be subtle, by visiting envoys who raise an eyebrow when they realise you're listening, understanding. French is fluid and fast, full of sounds that feel like secrets wrapped in silk. You stumble through your first phrases, but the words are soft in your mouth, and you can tell people are impressed. Then there's your native tongue, the language of your homeland, Anglo-Saxon, Old English, or maybe something even more regional, peppered with dialects and rough edges. That one you're supposed to speak properly, but not too much. It's the language of the people, the servants, the soldiers. You're allowed to know it, but if you sound too comfortable in it, eyebrows rise. The goal is to belong to the court, not the kitchen. There's also reading. At first, only simple letters scratched into wax tablets. Then illuminated letters, swirling and glowing, each one like a little puzzle you're meant to solve with reverence. You copy them slowly, tongue between your teeth, while your tutor murmurs encouragement in Latin, and your ink runs out exactly when you're making progress. Sometimes you wish the letters would stay still. Other times, they dance for you. Writing comes later. Girls, after all, don't need to write, not the way boys do. Boys write letters of state. Girls dictate. Still, you're taught the basics. Enough to scratch out a polite thank you or a carefully crafted apology, in case you ever offend a bishop or a dowager duchess with too much eye contact. Your penmanship is critiqued not for accuracy, but for grace. You're told your lines should be as elegant as your posture. You wonder if anyone ever praised a prince for elegant loops. Here's the kicker though. Your education isn't about expanding your mind, not really. It's about polishing it, making it shiny and appealing. You're being trained like a gemstone, cut, measured, displayed. A princess who can quote scripture and flirt in French, that's a political treasure. One who can navigate court poetry and speak just enough Greek to impress a Byzantine ambassador, that's currency. And here's a weird little side note. In some noble households, girls were taught courtly love poetry, alongside religious texts. The same mouth that whispered prayers before bed might also recite verses about unrequited passion and tragic knights dying for a lady's handkerchief. Your governess refers to this as moral contrast. You suspect it's more about preparing you to smile politely, while being emotionally bartered between kingdoms. By the time you're 6 or 7, your education has a rhythm. Mornings for grammar, midday for religious instruction, afternoons for music or manners or, if you're lucky, a history lesson told through a story about a long-dead queen who once hid a dagger in her girdle and made a bishop cry. Those are your favourite. You remember the scent of wax and wool in the room, the fire hissing softly, the governess pretending not to enjoy the part where the queen outwits a king. And beneath it all, something unspoken. Your education is laced with threat. Every lesson is a test of your worth, your marketability, your ability to survive in a world where women are praised for silence but punished for ignorance. A princess who speaks too much is a liability. One who doesn't speak at all, even worse. You're supposed to be clever, but never arrogant. Informed, but never opinionated. Educated, but only in the subjects that make you desirable. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how extensive a medieval princess's education actually was. Some claim they were highly literate, educated almost as thoroughly as their brothers, especially in royal courts that valued diplomacy and image. Others suggest it varied wildly, with many girls taught only the basics: prayer, manners, and enough Latin to survive a wedding mass. The truth likely depends on wealth, geography, and how ambitious your parents are. Your parents are very ambitious. At night you repeat the day's lessons under your breath before sleep takes you. You whisper your prayers in 3 languages, not because anyone demands it, but because it feels like power. You think of the queens you've learned about, the ones who held pens like weapons, who sent letters across oceans that started wars and ended sieges. You wonder if one day your words will do the same. But for now you lie beneath your embroidered covers, surrounded by books you're not yet allowed to touch, repeating amo, amas, amat like it's a spell. The wind scrapes against the castle walls, but your mind is full of verses and vows and verbs, and somehow that makes the dark feel just a little less cold. You don't know their names. The peasants, the villagers, the people who live just outside the castle walls, Those vague, shapeless figures who drift through your childhood like ghosts in rough-spun cloaks. You see them sometimes from the window of your chamber, tiny and distant, moving like ants across frozen fields or down mud-slick roads. Your governess tells you they're the people, as if that's a category you'll never be part of, as if they're a myth, like dragons or good porridge. But they're real, and they're always there, even if they never speak to you. Once a week you pass near them when your tutor takes you to the chapel, your little gloved hands clutching a velvet prayer book you can barely lift. The castle gate opens for your procession. 2 guards in front, 2 behind, and a lady-in-waiting muttering psalms. That's when you catch glimpses of them. A woman balancing a basket of turnips on her head. A barefoot boy with straw in his hair and a grin like mischief. An old man who bows low enough that his spine seems to fold in half. You're taught not to stare. It encourages familiarity, your governess warns, but you do it anyway. You stare from behind your hood, trying to understand who they are and why their clothes look like the rags used to clean your floor. You wonder if they sleep in stone towers too. You wonder if they have dolls or tutors or honeyed pies. You wonder briefly what it's like to run barefoot through mud and not get scolded. At meals you hear vague references to the harvest or the grain tithe or those cursed millers again, but it all feels like background noise. Peasants are discussed like weather, unpredictable, occasionally dangerous, never your problem, but they are your problem, you just don't know it yet. Sometimes a peasant is brought to the castle, not often. When it happens, it's because something's gone wrong. A theft, a fight, a petition for mercy. You see one up close when you're 7. He's led into the great hall in chains, his hair matted, his hands shaking. Your father doesn't look at him. Your mother covers her nose discreetly. The man speaks in a dialect so thick you can barely understand him, but you catch the word daughter. He kneels, begs, and is eventually dragged out by guards. You ask what happened. No one answers. Later, you hear the kitchen staff whispering that his daughter was accused of stealing bread and was taken away. You're not sure what taken away means, but you know enough not to ask twice. There's a strange little fact. In some medieval courts, princesses were discouraged from seeing peasants up close, lest they develop unseemly sympathies, which is code for, don't realise they're human. You're supposed to care about your people, of course, but from a distance, through charity, through prayers, through coins dropped discreetly into poor boxes you're not allowed to touch. And then there's the gifting tradition. On feast days or holy days, you're expected to give alms to the poor. It's ceremonial. You're led outside by your governess, handed a small pouch of coins, and directed to place it in a beggar's palm. The beggar bows low, mumbles thanks. You curtsy stiffly, wondering if this is what mercy is supposed to feel like. You're told you've done something noble, something good, but it doesn't feel like much. It feels like performance. Scholars debate how aware medieval princesses were of the peasantry's suffering. Some letters suggest they understood more than we give them credit for, especially those sent away young, forced to adapt to unfamiliar lands. Others portray them as completely insulated, as if their entire world was made of velvet and incense. You're somewhere in between. You're curious, but you're also cocooned. You see but don't touch. You hear but don't ask. Your governess once told you, in a rare moment of softness, that peasants live lives of humble suffering. She meant it as praise, as though humility were a gift and suffering a calling. You try to imagine their lives, what it's like to rise with the sun and not the bells, to work with your hands instead of your voice, to eat what you grow rather than what arrives on a silver tray. It sounds exhausting. But part of you wonders if it's also simpler, freer. No court whispers, no marriage negotiations, no posture drills. One day, during a rare walk beyond the castle garden, you see a group of peasant children playing near a well. They're shouting, throwing sticks, laughing like they have nothing to prove. One of them, muddy, wild-haired, fearless, spots you and waves. You wave back instinctively. The guards move in instantly. "Mind your station," your lady-in-waiting hisses, dragging your arm down. The children scatter, like birds startled from a field. You stare after them, your wrist stinging from the grip. That night you think about that wave, about the fact that your hand was slapped for acknowledging someone else's existence. You lie awake in bed, the stone walls pressing in, and wonder what would happen if you ever walked beyond the castle gates alone. You suspect you'd be recognised. You also suspect you wouldn't last an hour. There's an awkward truth no one likes to say aloud. Your life depends entirely on the labour of people you'll never meet. Your gowns are woven by calloused fingers in dimly lit rooms. Your food is grown by hands blistered from ploughs and frost. Your books are copied by monks who eat once a day and never speak your name, and still they bow when your name is spoken. They kneel when you pass, as if you earned any of this. You haven't. Not yet. But you might. Someday. If you're clever. If you listen. If you learn that real power isn't in the title or the gown or the gold-threaded pillow, it's in how you treat the people no one sees. Outside your window, the village glows with candlelight and chimney smoke. You can't see their faces, but you know they're out there. Laughing, eating, praying, surviving. The distant hum of their lives reaches you in fragments. Music without lyrics, a world just out of reach. You turn over in your bed, close your eyes, and wonder if they ever dream about you. You can't move, not properly, not freely, not without hearing a chorus of pins shift and fabric rustle, and someone clearing their throat behind you in disapproval. The first thing you notice about your clothes is that they're not designed for actual children. They're designed for princesses, which is to say, tiny mannequins who happen to breathe and occasionally fall into mud puddles, much to the horror of their governesses. Dressing every morning becomes an event, a ceremony, a battle, and you're rarely the one in charge. It starts with the underlayers, linen, always linen. You learn quickly that the quality of linen matters. A stiff, scratchy weave leaves your skin red for hours, and no one wants to see a royal girl scratching herself during Vespers. Over that comes the chemise, then the kirtle, which is basically a long sleeveless gown worn under the actual gown, because heaven forbid a princess wear fewer than 3 full-length garments on a summer day. Then the overdress, your main event. Embroidered, dyed with expensive pigments, maybe even adorned with pearls or bits of silver thread, depending on how flattering the current politics are. By the time you're 7, your daily outfit weighs more than your childhood dog. You feel it every time you try to walk faster than your tutor's pace or climb stairs 2 at a time, which is forbidden anyway. And the shoes? Let's not talk about the shoes. Stiff, decorative, impractical little torture devices that slip off at the worst possible moments and are always slightly too small, because looking dainty apparently outweighs comfort. You once lost one in a puddle. You were scolded for an hour, not because the shoe was ruined, but because a baron saw your stockinged foot. Corsets aren't quite a thing yet, not in the way they'll become, but you're still laced into things. Bodices pulled tight to encourage good posture, sashes wrapped around your waist to create that gentle, obedient silhouette. Your governess checks the lines of your dress every morning like a commander inspecting armour. Wrinkles are insubordination. A crooked hem is practically treason. And then there are the pins. Pins everywhere. Holding sleeves in place, fastening veils, tucking in stray bits of fabric that dare to move out of line. You learn very early that any sudden movement can end in stabbing. Not by a guard, but by your own clothing. Once, while kneeling for morning prayers, a sleeve pin jabbed you in the side and you gasped so loud the priest forgot his next line. Everyone turned to look at you. You apologised, even though your ribs were bleeding. You must become comfortable with discomfort, your lady-in-waiting told you afterward, handing you a clean linen square as if that explained everything. There's a curious little historical detail that makes this even worse. Some noble girls were stitched into their dresses. Not daily, but for special occasions. Yes, literally sewn in. You stand still for hours while 2 servants work in silence, one stitching the fabric closed along your spine or side seam. the other adjusting your veil so you won't notice you're being slowly imprisoned. Why? Because buttons were expensive, zippers didn't exist, and the only thing more luxurious than being well-dressed was being permanently well-dressed. Your hair isn't spared either. It must be braided, smoothed, pulled into styles that make your scalp ache but make your face look longer, which is apparently a compliment. You're told to keep it covered in chapel, and uncovered when presented to guests, unless the guests are foreign nobles, in which case it depends on their customs, which your lady-in-waiting studied extensively, and now recites like a bard. Hair up for Iberians, down for Normans, wrapped entirely for the Benedictines. Oh, and no ribbons on holy days. You once asked why you can't just wear something simple, something soft. Your governess raised an eyebrow and said, "You're not a goose girl," as if simplicity were a form of laziness, as if comfort were for the faithless. Your nurse tried to sneak you a tunic once, just a plain woolen one, worn during laundry day so no one would notice. You spun in it for hours, giddy with movement, until a chambermaid caught you. The tunic vanished. Your nurse didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. There's an open, scholarly debate about how much autonomy royal girls had in choosing their clothes. Some accounts suggest that by adolescence, princesses developed distinct fashion preferences and had their own seamstresses. Others argue their wardrobes were entirely curated by older women or male stewards obsessed with courtly modesty and power optics. What's clear is this: your clothes are not your own, not yet. They're a message, a symbol, a barrier, and the message changes depending on who's watching. If there's a visiting noble with marriageable sons, your dress might be more extravagant. If the church is visiting, more modest. If your father is angry, you might be dressed like your mother's side of the family just to make a point. One week you're in soft blue velvet to look demure. The next, red brocade because you must radiate strength. You start to suspect you could disappear entirely and no one would notice, as long as the gown is correct. You also learn that colours mean things. Blue for loyalty, red for power, green for fertility, which is confusing at first until you realise they're already thinking about your future womb. Gold, of course, is always welcome. It whispers wealth, it gleams in candlelight, and it stains your fingers if the dye hasn't been properly set. Once, during a feast, a visiting countess called your saffron sleeves exquisite. You didn't know what saffron was. Your tutor later explained it's a spice worth more than its weight in silver. You ate porridge that night while wearing the equivalent of a peasant's annual income on each arm. You grow used to it. The weight, the prickling, the pressure. Dressing becomes a form of armour, a performance. You smooth your skirts like a grown woman. You bow without wrinkling your sleeves. You walk with your chin high, even when your shoes are pinching your toes so hard they bleed. You learn how to remove layers silently in the dark when you're too tired to call for help. You count the pins by feel, you hide the bruises, and sometimes late at night you press your face into your pillow and imagine a world where you wear nothing but soft cotton. No embroidery, no pins, no meaning, just fabric that bends when you breathe. But then the bell rings and you rise and the garments await. You are a princess. You are dressed accordingly. There is a specific way to sit. You learn this around the same time you learn to eat solid food and not cry when you see a bishop's mitre. You must sit with your back straight, shoulders back, ankles crossed, not too tightly, not too loosely, and hands gently folded in your lap. Fingers relaxed, not clenched, because clenched hands signal nerves or, God forbid, opinion. You don't slump, you don't squirm, you don't fidget or sigh or scratch your nose, even if it itches like something's nesting in it. Sitting for a medieval princess is a full-body performance art, and you perform daily. It starts at meals, where every movement is visible, every flicker of expression documented in the silent ledgers of court memory. It continues in chapel, where long hours on a narrow bench with no cushion and plenty of judgment teach you the difference between endurance and virtue. Eventually it becomes instinctual. Your body learns to stiffen when someone important enters the room. to rise smoothly without stumbling, to smile with just your mouth and never your teeth. You're told that stillness is elegance, movement is chaos. Princesses are not creatures of chaos. You watch the older women in court, those who've survived decades of power, marriage, widowhood, and notice how they barely move. Every gesture is precise, deliberate, economical. They are statues that speak. You aspire to that, though privately you wonder if they ever danced. But dancing isn't part of your day yet. Sitting is. You sit for lessons. You sit for embroidery. You sit during official processions perched on a horse side saddle, laced so tightly into your gown that you feel like your lungs have been politely excused from functioning. And you sit during court sessions, not to participate of course, but to be seen, to be present. Your presence, it turns out, is a political tool, especially when it's quiet. There's a certain kind of power in stillness. That's what your governess tells you. When you do not move, others must move around you. You try to believe her, even when your knees ache and your spine feels like it's folding itself into medieval origami. You tell yourself this is what queens do. They endure. They hover above discomfort until it becomes invisible. And if it isn't invisible, at least it's dignified. One afternoon, a visiting duchess arrives. She's old, terrifying, dressed in layers of black velvet that look heavy enough to sink a ship. She insists on inspecting your comportment. You're made to sit before her for nearly an hour while she evaluates your posture, your poise, and how long you can maintain eye contact without blinking too often. You pass, barely. Too much tension in the shoulders, she says, but promising. You're given a sugared almond as a reward. It tastes like dust and pride. There's a fringe historical detail that would amuse you if you knew it. Some courts trained young noblewomen to control their facial expressions through mirror exercises, smiling just enough, blinking slowly, holding a neutral gaze for entire meals. Smiling was rarely spontaneous. It was studied, practiced, a weapon with varying degrees of sharpness depending on who it was aimed at. You start to notice how everyone is always watching. Not just the nobles, but the servants, the clerics, the guards standing like gargoyles near every entrance. Everyone sees how you sit, how you hold your cup, how you cross your feet. One slouch, and it becomes a topic in the Great Hall later. She seems restless, someone will whisper, undisciplined. Your body's no longer your own. It's court property, a symbol to be managed. There's scholarly debate over how deeply court etiquette affected the emotional development of royal children. Some say the endless focus on posture and performance turned them into hollow reflections of their handlers' ambitions. Others argue that these rituals gave them structure and resilience in a world where chaos and violence were always close. You're not sure. Sometimes you feel like a knight trapped in a maiden's body, armour made of brocade and obedience. But stillness isn't always safety. One day, during a feast, you sit so still for so long that your legs fall asleep. When it's time to stand, you can't. You stumble, catch yourself, and manage to smile through the panic. Your governess covers it with a comment about the tightness of your shoes. No one mentions it again, but you hear the whispers later. The princess fainted. Poor thing, not enough meat. Perhaps she's delicate. You clench your fists under the table. You weren't delicate, you were numb. You're allowed brief moments of motion, during walks in the garden, when the governess pretends not to notice you spinning once or twice before settling back into propriety. During embroidery, when your fingers twitch with the rhythm of stitches, you can almost pretend you're free. And sometimes, when the room is empty and the candlelight is soft, you practice silly faces in the mirror. Just to prove you still can. You start to understand the difference between your real self and your royal self. The real self wants to fidget, to laugh too loudly, to stretch her arms wide and run down the hall barefoot. The royal self is polished, poised, perfect. You carry her like a shield. Sometimes she feels heavy. Other times she feels like the only thing keeping you safe. Your brothers, if you have any, don't seem to deal with the same pressure. They squirm, they fight, they run through the hallways with sticks pretending to be swords. They're scolded, yes, but never reshaped. No one tells them their value lies in stillness. They are raised to take action. You are raised to wait, and yet you learn to carve out tiny rebellions. You sit with one ankle slightly unaligned, just to see if anyone notices. You tap your finger against the arm of your chair during long sermons, counting the words of the priest's homily. You memorize the number of ceiling beams above your usual seat in the chapel. 36. One cracked. One painted with a faded lily. You find freedom in the details. You don't realize it yet, but this art of sitting still, of performing calm while your mind races, will serve you later, in negotiations, intense family dinners, in uncomfortable wedding chambers. You're learning patience, endurance. The art of silence is power. That night, you dream of moving, running through fields with no hemline to trip you, jumping into rivers, climbing trees without anyone shouting your name like a warning. You wake up sore from staying still too long, but in the dream, you were free. In the real world, you rise, you smooth your dress, you sit. You're 7 years old, and somehow your portrait is 20. That's the first thing you notice. The face staring back at you from the painting is you, technically, but also not. The eyes are yours, though more thoughtful, less distracted. The mouth is yours, but closed in a serene smile you've never managed to make without sneezing immediately afterward. And the dress, lavender, with silver embroidery so detailed it looks like frost, has never actually touched your skin. They painted you in clothes you don't own, in a posture you can't hold, in a body you haven't grown into. And still, everyone claps like this frozen stranger as a triumph. Portrait Day is not a celebration, it's a job. It starts at dawn because apparently paint needs light, and so do you. You're washed, scented, powdered, and pinned into your nicest gown. One that makes your arms itch and your neck blotchy. The artist, a man with long fingers and a permanent frown, arrives with his brushes and his velvet case of tools, looking like a physician about to perform surgery. He doesn't speak to you at first. He speaks to your governess, to your nurse, to your mother. Then, finally, he looks at you and says, "Sit." You sit. Of course you sit. You're a princess. You've trained for this. The first hour is silence and adjustment. He positions your chin with the back of his knuckle, tilts your head, moves your fingers. "Too tense," he mutters. "She looks like she's bracing for an attack." You are, but that's beside the point. Eventually he starts sketching. You're told not to blink too much, not to twitch, not to look like you have thoughts. You start counting breaths to stay still. 23 in, someone sneezes. 47, your foot starts to cramp. At 60, a bead of sweat rolls down your back, and you picture yourself leaping out of the chair and running into the woods. Dress be damned! At 75, you begin to dissociate slightly and imagine the painting you back. There's something eerie about watching your face appear on canvas. As the hours pass, you notice how he changes things, just slightly. He straightens your nose, lifts your eyebrows, softens your jaw. You don't know whether to feel flattered or offended. You try to speak once to ask why he's made your mouth so small. Your governess hushes you before the word's even halfway out. Princesses don't question their artists, but it feels like someone's rewriting you in front of your face. There's a weird, wonderful fringe fact about medieval portraits. Artists were often told to paint the ideal version of a person, not the true one, especially for women. Smooth skin, straight nose, gentle expression. These weren't just aesthetic choices, they were political. You're not being painted as you are. You're being painted as you should be, unmarred by illness, unbothered by worry, unsmudged by real life. A perfect porcelain version of a person still learning long division, and that portrait will travel. Oh yes, you're not just a painting, you're a product. This image might be sent across the sea to a potential suitor, shown to ambassadors, or hung in a grand hallway to intimidate visiting nobles into remembering that you're not a child. You are royalty, you are marriageable, you are currency with a pulse. There's scholarly debate over how much input princesses had in their own portraits. Some suggest they were allowed to select details, colour of the dress, hairstyle, even the inclusion of a favourite brooch. Others believe they had no say at all, that their image was curated entirely by parents, painters, and politics. Given how little you were allowed to choose your breakfast this morning, you suspect it's the latter. Eventually the sitting ends. You're unpinned from your gown like a butterfly removed from a display. Your legs are numb, your fingers twitch involuntarily. Your governess praises your stillness. Your nurse hands you a sweet and says, "Only 3 more sessions and it will be done." 3 more sessions. In the evening you sneak a peek at the work in progress. The painter has left the room to eat. You tiptoe in, heart pounding, and there she is. You, but not you. This girl has no dirt under her nails, no flush in her cheeks, no uncertainty in her eyes. She's regal, serene, the kind of princess who never sneezes during mass or daydreams during grammar lessons. You stare at her and wonder if she'll be more real to the world than you ever will. Later, you dream about her. In the dream, she steps out of the canvas, curtsies, and takes your place at the dinner table while you watch from the shadows. No one notices. They toast her. She smiles politely. She speaks perfect French. You try to call out, but your voice sounds like static. She lifts her goblet and gives you a tiny wink. When you wake, you're unsure whether to laugh or cry. A week later, the portrait is finished. It's unveiled in a small ceremony. Your parents nod approvingly. Your tutor says something about noble bearing. The painter is paid in coin, wine, and a fur-lined cloak. You are praised for your beauty, your composure, your elegance, the things you didn't choose. The painting is hung in a corridor you rarely visit, one lined with ancestors, queens with identical cheekbones, daughters with blank expressions. You walk past them and wonder what their lives were like, if they ever felt lost behind their own faces, and then, in the quiet of your room, you press your forehead to the cool window pane and stare out at the grey sky. The wind rustles the trees, your hair escapes its braid. For once, you let it. Because out here at least, no one is painting you. You can be flawed, you can be unfinished, you can just be. Plague doesn't knock on the door politely. It barges in, uninvited, invisible, and absolutely uninterested in your title. At first, it's just a rumour, a whisper in the hallways, a nervous murmur from a maid who heard from the butcher's boy, who heard from his uncle in the next town over that something bad is happening. Then it's a report, delivered to your father by a servant with tight lips and wide eyes. A nearby village, one under your family's protection, has lost half its people in a week. They say it started with a cough and ended with mass graves. You're 8. You know what death is in theory. You've read about it in prayers, seen it in paintings, skeletons dancing, pale saints lying serenely on beds of roses. But now it's real, close enough to taste in the back of your throat. Plague smells like panic and boiled vinegar. That's what they start washing the floors with. Vinegar and herbs, lavender and wormwood, crushed so hard the scent makes your eyes water. Suddenly, everyone's a physician. Every hallway reeks of desperation and alchemy. You're not allowed to leave your chambers. No chapel, no garden, no lessons in the south wing. Quarantine is the new protocol, though no one calls it that. They say you're protected. The nurse, the governess, the tutor, they still come, but they wear cloth over their mouths now. Your favourite page boy disappears. You ask where he went. No one answers. Your governess changes the subject so fast it feels like whiplash. Soon, a priest starts coming more often. He doesn't speak to you directly. He just stands in the doorway, muttering prayers under his breath, flinging holy water at the corners of the room. Your governess insists you kneel when he does it. You're not sure why, but you do. The water hits your forehead like ice, and you pretend it's cleansing something other than fear. The castle shuts down. Fewer servants, fewer fires lit. Meals become simpler. Your parents dine alone now, behind closed doors. Your mother sends notes instead of kisses. She signs them with little drawings of stars. One day, Your nurse receives word that her cousin has died. You don't know this cousin, but you watch her cry quietly while scrubbing your combs with rosemary water. You want to hug her, but no one is allowed to touch anymore. And then there's the monastery trip. An emergency retreat, they call it. One of the family's safe houses tucked deep in the woods, managed by monks who've sworn to absolute silence and excellent hygiene. You're bundled into a wagon at dawn with a lady-in-waiting, a single guard, and a trunk of carefully packed essentials: books, clothes, candles, and one well-wrapped relic said to contain a saint's tooth. For protection. Of course. The journey's long and tense. You're not allowed to look out the window, but you peek anyway. The villages you pass look hollow. No smoke from chimneys, no children chasing carts, just shuttered windows and empty roads. Once you spot a man digging in a field, alone. He pauses, looks up at the wagon, and bows. You wave. Your governess pulls your hand back before he can see. The monastery is cold and clean. Too clean. The kind of clean that smells of scrubbed stone and secrets. The monks don't speak, but they bow respectfully. You're given a small chamber near the chapel, with one window and no tapestries. The bed is hard. The silence is harder. No bells ring here except for prayer. No laughter, no music, no gossip. Just the steady hum of a whispered Latin and the occasional creak of footsteps in the hall. This is where you live now, for weeks, maybe months. No one knows how long the sickness will last, so you settle into a strange routine. Morning prayers, simple meals, quiet lessons. You read psalms by candlelight and write letters you're not allowed to send. You embroider crosses into linen with trembling hands. You try not to cry when you hear your governess weeping softly behind the door. Here's a curious fringe fact. Some people believed ringing church bells could drive away the plague. Others burned sulphur, wore beaked masks filled with herbs, or drew chalk circles around their beds. Your governess keeps a pouch of dried marigold on your pillow. She says it wards off death. You believe her because the alternative is unbearable. There's also a debate among scholars about how isolated noble children truly were during outbreaks. Some say they were spirited away the moment illness struck, hidden in rural estates with dozens of retainers to keep them safe. Others argue that no castle was ever truly plague-proof, and that panic often outweighed protocol. You can confirm the panic part. Every cough you hear makes your blood freeze. Every time your nurse clears her throat, your mind spirals. Eventually word comes that the worst has passed. The village nearby lost half its people. The castle lost 3 cooks, a stable hand, and a scribe. The rest survived. You're going home. The journey back feels different. The air seems thinner, the trees quieter. You wonder if the world has changed while you were away, or if you have. When the castle towers reappear on the horizon, you expect to feel relief, but all you feel is dread. You don't know what's waiting inside. Your chambers are exactly the same. Dustless, arranged, sterile, but something's off. A favourite toy is missing. A dress you liked is gone. The old page boy never returned. No one talks about it. Life resumes as if nothing happened, like you've returned from a holiday instead of hiding from death. But you remember everything. That night you lie in bed and listen to the silence. It's different now. Not peaceful, but tense. Waiting. You wonder if the plague is truly gone, or just sleeping. Either way, you know now that your world is not untouchable, that your blood does not make you immune, that death doesn't care about titles, and you know that next time you might not get the warning. Still, you close your eyes. Still, you pray. Because that's what princesses do. By the time you're 9, maybe 10, you start hearing whispers about 2 possible futures, the crown or the convent. Of course, no one says it so plainly to your face. No one ever does. The truth is always wrapped in pretty phrases: devotion to God, or destined for greatness, or the holy bride of Christ. But make no mistake, it's a choice between being someone's queen or being no one's wife at all. You're a child, still losing baby teeth, still forgetting which fork to use at formal dinners, but already your entire life is being framed by this either/or. Your mother's ladies talk about it casually while threading pearls into your hair. If she were mine, one says, I'd send her straight to the Abbey. Fewer risks that way. The other scoffs. With that face, she'll be a duchess at the very least. You sit there in silence, pretending not to hear them, pretending you didn't flinch when one of them said risks. You've heard the rumours. Girls who become nuns are girls whose families couldn't make the right match, or who weren't pretty enough, or docile enough, or wealthy enough, or girls who are too valuable to waste on marriage, oddly enough. Daughters of kings sent to rule abbeys like miniature queens, their vows sewn into silk, their prayers just another form of political power. It's not always a punishment. Sometimes it's a strategy, and sometimes it's an escape. You've started to wonder, what would it be like to choose the veil? To live in a place where no one's measuring your worth by your ability to charm a man twice your age? You imagine yourself in a simple habit, hair cropped short, rising before dawn to sing hymns and feed chickens. There's something peaceful in the thought. Quiet, predictable. No dowry negotiations. No betrothal to a man who smells like boiled onions. Just God and gardens. But then you remember that nuns still answer to someone. Abbesses, bishops, sometimes kings. There's no such thing as real freedom, just a different kind of obedience. Your tutor begins working more scripture into your lessons. You're assigned the lives of saints, especially the virgin martyrs. Women who defied marriage, embraced suffering, died with pious smiles. You read about St. Catherine, who debated philosophers and confounded emperors before being beheaded. St. Agnes, who refused a suitor and was dragged through the streets. St. Margaret, who fought off a literal dragon while maintaining her chastity. These are your role models now, women who suffered beautifully, virtuously, quietly. Your governess begins dropping comments like breadcrumbs. Of course, the abbess at St. Lucia was a cousin to your grandmother. Or, did you know the nuns at St. Hildegard's are permitted to study Latin and astronomy? You nod politely, even when you want to scream, because it's becoming clear they're planting seeds, testing the idea, seeing how it grows in your mind. The truth is, your future depends on factors no one can fully control. If your family's political situation changes, if your father loses favour, or your brother gains an alliance, or a rival kingdom shifts its interests, your marital value can rise or fall overnight. If no advantageous match appears on the horizon, the convent becomes a backup plan, a very spiritual, very solemn, very permanent backup plan. There's a historical debate over how much say royal girls had in these decisions. Some scholars believe daughters were pushed toward the veil against their will, their vows a form of containment. Others argue that noble-born nuns lived privileged lives, educated, influential, sometimes even powerful in their own right. Abbesses controlled land, issued orders, managed large communities. Some wielded more autonomy than married women ever could. But that only comes later, after years of obedience, after silence, after erasing the idea of ever being anything else. One morning your mother invites you into her private solar. That alone is unusual. She usually communicates through layers of servants, glances, and subtle changes to your wardrobe. But today, she asks you to sit. She's holding a rosary, but she's not praying, just letting it wind through her fingers like something she's not ready to let go of. She doesn't smile. You're old enough now to begin thinking seriously about your future, she says. The words are gentle, the meaning is not. You listen as she outlines what it means to live a life of devotion, the peace of the cloister, the freedom from scandal, the closeness to God. She says it like she's reading from a book she's memorized. Then she looks you in the eye and adds, or, of course, you may wed, if the match is worthy. The room feels colder when she says it, like the air is watching. You don't answer right away. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to consider, reflect, pray. But that night, as you lie in bed, You imagine both futures in vivid, impossible detail. You imagine the convent, the rhythm of the bells, the smell of ink and candle wax, the soft chant of Latin in a stone chapel. Then you imagine the court, the weight of a crown, the thrill of dancing in silks, the ache of childbirth, the risk of betrayal. Neither feels safe, neither feels truly yours. And here's a strange little fringe fact to toss into your sleepless thoughts. In some rare cases, noble girls who took vows as children later renounced them and re-entered the world, usually to marry. It was scandalous, but it happened. Which means that even choices carved in stone sometimes crack. You wonder what choice you'll make, if you'll ever truly get to make one, or if your life is already moving along a track, and all this talk of options is just performance. You wonder what would happen if you ran away. If you chose neither path, if you carved a third one, you're still a child. But you've begun to dream like someone who's been caged too long. The next morning you rise early and braid your own hair. Not neatly, not perfectly, but for once, without help. You look at yourself in the mirror and don't imagine a veil, or a crown, just your face, still here, still unchosen, and then you kneel, fold your hands, and prepare for another day of lessons. Because dreaming is fine, but for now, you still belong to everyone but yourself. You're 11 when you receive your first marriage proposal, or rather, when your father receives it. You're not consulted, you're not even in the room. You hear about it the next day, over breakfast, between a sip of watered wine and a forkful of congealed egg. The Duke of Berenholt has expressed interest, your mother says, like she's mentioning the weather. You'll be kind if he visits. She doesn't look up from her plate. You pause, blink, and try to remember if you've met this Duke before. You haven't. But you have heard of him. He's older, much older. At least 40, with 2 grown sons and a limp from a battle he only kind of won. The limp is not the problem. The problem is that he's awful. Everyone says so, though only in whispers. He's the sort of man who treats people like candle wax, something to burn slowly, then toss away when the light's gone. And now apparently he wants you. You're 11. You still sleep with a carved wooden rabbit under your pillow and cry when your nurse sings sad songs. But that doesn't matter. Your age isn't a barrier, it's a feature. Because what the Duke wants is someone mouldable, quiet, untouched, and politically shiny enough to polish his reputation. No one says this outright, of course. The official language is flowery, a most suitable match, a generous dowry, an alliance beneficial to both houses, but you can hear the subtext loud and clear. You're a womb with a bloodline, a face that looks good in portraits, a silk-wrapped treaty with legs. The castle is buzzing, everyone knows. Maids pass by your chamber and curtsy a little lower. Your governess starts adjusting your posture with more urgency. Your nurse, who has always been quietly protective, starts brushing your hair slower, more tenderly, like she's trying to hold on to these last moments before you become someone else's property. At first you don't understand what's supposed to happen next. Is he coming to visit? Will he bring gifts? Will he expect you to speak to him? Your questions are met with vague smiles or tightened lips. You'll be informed, someone says, which is code for don't ask again. Eventually the Duke does send a gift, a necklace, heavy with emeralds and meaning. It arrives in a velvet box carried by a sweating courier who bows so low you think he might fall over. The necklace is beautiful but also somehow grotesque. Too much. You hold it in your hands and feel the weight of it in your bones. It smells faintly of incense and damp stone. You're expected to wear it to supper that evening. You do. Everyone compliments it. You smile, because that's what you're trained to do. But inside, something's twisting. You realise that this glittering thing around your neck isn't a gift. It's a collar. Here's a strange historical nugget to chew on. Marriage proposals for princesses in the Middle Ages were often initiated when the girl was barely past infancy. Betrothals at 5 or 6 weren't unusual, but 11 is prime time. Old enough to understand what's happening, too young to stop it. That night, You overhear a conversation between your father and one of his advisors. You're not supposed to be there. You're hiding behind a tapestry, heart-pounding, breath-shallow. The advisor mentions your age. "She's young, my lord," he says cautiously. Your father replies, "And yet, they want her now. We can't afford to wait. Not with the border tensions." You slip away before you hear the rest. You already know what it means. You're not being married for love. You're being married for geography. You try to imagine it, leaving the castle, the garden, your nurse, living in a cold new place with strange customs and servants who don't know how you like your tea, sleeping beside a man who has battle scars older than you, bearing children before you're old enough to braid your own hair without help. The thought makes you sick. You throw up that night quietly into a basin and say nothing. The next day you receive a letter from the Duke. It's written in neat, confident script. He calls you radiant, which is a word you only barely understand. He praises your lineage, your family, your obedient reputation. He says he looks forward to meeting you soon. You're supposed to write back. Your tutor hands you parchment and ink and a sample reply to copy. You hold the pen but don't move. Finally you write something simple. "I await your visit, my lord. May God bless this union." Then you add a tiny flourish under your name, a single flower drawn in the corner. You don't know why. Maybe as a protest, maybe as a prayer. There's an open scholarly debate about how much autonomy noble girls had in rejecting suitors. Technically, your consent is needed. Technically. But refusal means disappointing your family, embarrassing your house, and possibly sparking diplomatic offence. Refusal is dangerous for everyone, including you. Still, you try, quietly. You tell your mother that you don't feel ready, that the Duke frightens you. She doesn't scold you. She just sighs, takes your hand and says, "None of us are ever ready. We just learn to endure." Then she looks away, like she's remembering something or someone, and you wonder if her marriage was chosen just as carefully. A week later, word arrives. The Duke has been delayed. Some business with rebels on the northern border. You breathe easier just for a moment, but you know the delay won't last. Men like him always arrive eventually, and so you prepare. You practice your curtsy, your smile, your small talk. You wear the necklace again, even though it pinches your collarbone. You stand still during your next portrait sitting, imagining that this version of you might someday replace the girl behind your eyes. That night before bed you stare at the ceiling and whisper to yourself, "Not yet. Please, not yet." No one answers, but you say it again anyway. You don't get to say no, but sometimes your father does. That's the one sliver of power you cling to when the world starts closing in around you. Because while you may not be allowed to choose your husband, he can at least refuse the ones who make your skin crawl, and you hope, with all your childish naivety, that he will. That somewhere underneath the crowns and sigils and gold-inked treaties, your father is still a man who remembers the daughter who once braided his beard while he pretended to sleep. After the Duke of Berenholt's interest begins to feel more like a looming execution, something shifts. A new envoy arrives, not from Berenholt but from a neighbouring kingdom, one with a better reputation, a stronger army, and most importantly a less revolting son. You hear about it before anyone tells you. Servants start polishing the silver more aggressively. The castle steward starts practicing his bow. Your mother calls for new gowns. You've learned to read the signs by now. A few days later you're summoned to the Solar. Your father is there, sitting beside your mother. He's holding a scroll. He looks tired, which is never a good sign. "A new offer," he says. "House Erenth." You nod, pretending you know the full implications of that name. You've heard of them, vaguely. They control a wealthy port city. They've managed to avoid open war for at least a decade, and their heir is rumoured to be young. Not young like you, but not ancient either. Somewhere in his 20s, practically a child in noble years. You're quiet for a long time, weighing your reaction. You've learned that speaking too quickly gives things away. Your mother is watching. Her fingers are laced tightly in her lap. She wants this match. You can tell. Your father, though, his expression is unreadable. That worries you most. He says nothing about Berenholt. Not a word. No explanation. No dismissal. No reassurance. The offer is simply gone. Vanished like smoke. You suspect something happened behind closed doors. Maybe a refusal. Maybe a threat. Maybe a better deal on the table. But no one tells you. They just expect you to adjust your expectations accordingly. You're told to write a letter of greeting to the heir of Erenth. You do, carefully. You choose your words like stepping stones across a river you've never crossed before. You write in perfect court-approved French. You keep it short, sweet, and full of the right kind of modesty. You even include another little drawing in the corner, a sun this time. Because you've decided that maybe, just maybe, this match might come with light instead of dread. Here's a strange little historical twist. While royal girls rarely chose their husbands outright, they could occasionally influence decisions. Through quiet suggestions, feigned illness, subtle refusals to perform, or sudden shows of favour toward one family over another. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it got them locked in a tower. You haven't dared try yet, but you keep the possibility tucked in the folds of your mind like a hidden knife. Then one afternoon you overhear something you're not meant to hear. Again, you're very good at that now. 2 advisors are speaking near the chapel doors. One mentions you by name, the other sighs and says, "She'd do better with Erenth, but Berenholt has leverage. It's not over." The words hit like a bucket of cold water. You'd thought the decision was made. You'd thought the Duke was out of the picture. But now you realise this is all a game of waiting. You're just the prize. You retreat to the library, your private sanctuary, the one place you're allowed to be quiet without suspicion. You sit beneath the stained glass window and run your fingers over a book you can't focus on. Your thoughts spiral. What if they change their minds again? What if your father doesn't say no next time? You think about telling him how you feel, about the fear, about how you lie awake every night imagining the Duke's voice in your ear. But when you finally see him, alone in the corridor, you freeze, you curtsy, you smile, you say nothing, because you're still just a girl in a dress, and he's a man with the power to marry you off like a chess piece. Still, that night something happens. You're called to dinner, just your father and you. No tutors, no mother, no advisors. He pours your watered wine himself, which he's never done before. "You've been brave," he says. The words hang in the air like a fragile blessing. "These are hard decisions. I don't make them lightly." You nod, unsure what to say. The food goes cold between you. At one point he reaches into his coat and pulls out a folded letter. "From Erenth," he says, his own hand. He passes it to you without ceremony. You open it slowly. The handwriting is neat but not ornamental. The letter is short, polite, not flowery. He mentions your reputation for intelligence. He says he looks forward to speaking with you, if given the chance. He wishes you peace. That's it. You don't know what you expected, but somehow this feels safe, at least for now. There's debate among historians about whether fathers acted as protectors or prison wardens in these matches. Some see them as ruthless deal-makers, others as reluctant players in a system bigger than themselves. Your father is hard to read. But when he stands to leave, he places a hand on your shoulder and says, "I'll do what's best." You want to ask, for who? But you don't. You just nod. Later, you hold the letter from Erenth under your pillow and whisper a thank you to no one in particular. Maybe to your father, maybe to the wind, maybe to yourself for surviving another day. For now, the Duke is silent. For now, you are not promised. You are only considered, and that is a kind of freedom. A thin one, temporary, but still, it's yours. It's strange knowing your body's worth a castle, or several castles depending on the season's politics. You don't feel like you're made of stone and land and rivers and gold, but apparently you are. Because that's what your dowry is, a neat inventory of everything that can be peeled off you and handed to someone else in exchange for a wedding. You're 12 now, old enough to understand that marriage is no longer a distant idea. It's an economic transaction wrapped in embroidery and vows, and you're the shiny centerpiece. Congratulations, you're a very valuable object. The scrolls arrive early in the morning, hand-delivered by two men in stiff cloaks who bow more to your father than the Virgin Mary. They carry ledgers, long, yellowed things scribbled with numbers and items and legal phrasing you can't yet decipher. But you don't need to read them to know what they are. You hear your name repeated often, followed by words like estate, inheritance, title transfer, and fertile land. Because nothing says romance like the promise of 3 watermills and the rights to a vineyard. You're not invited to the negotiation table, of course. That would be absurd. You're only the reason it's happening. So you listen through the walls, because walls in castles may be made of stone, but they have ears just like you do. And today, you're all ears. Your dowry includes jewellery, some of it yours, some of it symbolic. A brooch from your grandmother, a pearl-studded girdle worn by your mother the day she was married, a necklace that once belonged to a woman whose name has been scrubbed from history, but whose jewels are still relevant. Then come the land rights, a handful of pastures, a manor house in a distant province, 3 villages who'll never know they've just become part of a princess's price tag. And livestock, of course. Nothing says dynastic merger like 60 head of cattle and a very large goose farm. You learn later that your value is calculated by more than just property. Your bloodline is strong, your name politically useful, and your hymen, though no one dares speak the word aloud, is assumed to be intact, which, in their world, is currency. You are currency. The gown is just gift wrap. Here's a strange, unsettling historical fact. Sometimes, a girl's dowry was so massive that it could literally spark a war. Entire regions changed hands because of what a princess brought to her marriage. Kingdoms rose and fell because of trunks filled with silk, spice, and legal documents. There were even cases where a royal daughter's unpaid dowry triggered years of international tension. You could be the cause of a diplomatic incident just because someone miscounted the pigs. Your mother speaks to you that night once the documents are sealed and your father has drunk enough wine to stop brooding. You're fortunate, she says. Your dowry is generous. It will protect you. You nod, but your throat is tight. Protect you from what exactly? From a cruel husband? From a bored court? From loneliness? She doesn't elaborate. Your governess explains the ceremonial side. How your dowry will be presented, how each item must be inspected, verified and praised by the receiving family, how you will be expected to smile demurely as they count your coins and weigh your cloth. You won't have to carry any of it, of course. That's what porters are for. But you'll ride near it, and everyone will see you and know that the wagons behind you are full of pieces of your future. You ask her if the groom brings anything. She pauses, then says, "He brings his name." You try not to laugh. There's debate among scholars about the emotional weight of dowries for royal daughters. Some argue they were a source of pride, proof of worth. Others suggest they were a burden, a constant reminder that affection would always be conditional, and value always measurable. You just feel like you've been converted into numbers and property deeds. A few days later, you're allowed to view the items being prepared. It's surreal. Walking through a hall lined with trunks and chests, all marked with your family's seal. Silks folded like waves, goblets nested in straw, candelabras packed with more care than most people get in their whole lives. You spot a dress you used to wear when you were 6, repurposed for a symbolic childhood memento. You touch the sleeve. It still smells faintly of lavender and dust. One box is filled with manuscripts. Religious texts, poetry, a book of translated Greek philosophy. Gifts, apparently. Evidence that you're not just rich, but cultured. You run your fingers over the spine of one and wonder if your future husband will ever actually read it, or if he'll let you read at all. And then there's the chest of coins. So many coins. Gold and silver stamped with the crest of your house. You ask how much it all is worth, and your governess hesitates before saying, "Enough to buy a city." You don't ask which city. You're too afraid the answer might be the one you grew up in. The necklace from the Duke of Barinholt is quietly removed. It's deemed politically unsuitable now. You watch as it's wrapped in cloth and placed back in the treasury. Like a ghost no one wants to acknowledge. You feel lighter without it. Almost. That night you lie awake and do the math. Not the numbers. You're not allowed near the ledgers, but the human math. What parts of you are being handed away? Your name, your future, your lands, your body, all packed up in trunks and tied with a ribbon. You try to picture the man who will receive it all. Will he understand what it cost? Will he see you as a partner or just the living signature on a treaty? You don't know, but you know this. Your dowry is a promise of peace, of power, of obedience. It's a carefully packaged declaration that you are useful, agreeable, and ready. Whether or not you are. Now you're a letter writer. Not the kind who whispers secrets to friends or scribbles poetry under candlelight. No, you write with purpose now. With calculation. With a quill sharpened like a dagger and words dipped in diplomacy. You're still 12, still tripping over your own hemline some mornings, but suddenly you're expected to correspond like a miniature ambassador, and not just with your betrothed, or almost betrothed, but with nobles, abbesses, aging aunts, and the occasional foreign lady of questionable political use. These letters aren't personal, they're policy. Your tutor begins the new lessons with a flourish. Words, he says, are the battlefield of the court. You think he's being dramatic until you see how carefully he edits your first draft. What began as a warm, fluttery note to the Prince of Erinth, "I look forward to meeting you," is quickly stripped and rebuilt. By the time he's done, your sweet letter has become a subtle masterclass in flattery, restraint, and regional flanking courtesy. You reread it and barely recognise your own voice. From then on, writing is a daily ritual. Mornings for Latin translations, afternoons for diplomatic training, evenings for correspondence. You're taught to write with elegance but not passion, clarity but never directness. Your phrases must curve like a sword blade, charming, clever, but always dangerous. And so much of it is about what not to say. You never ask questions. You never reference the body. You avoid jokes unless they're heavily rehearsed. Even compliments are filtered. You can praise a man's coat of arms but not his actual arms, obviously. Your first serious letter goes to a countess in a distant province, someone who has no real power but lots of connections. You write it 3 times before your governess approves the final version. It reads like an invitation to be allies, though neither of you is in a position to actually make alliances. Still, it matters. Women write to other women, after all, weaving invisible nets across kingdoms. Sometimes those nets catch gossip, sometimes they catch war. There's an odd historical truth buried here. While men fought with swords, women fought with ink. Royal daughters, especially well-educated ones, became master communicators. Letters were their weapons, and they were expected to be good at it. A princess who couldn't write a persuasive missive was like a knight without a blade. Useless and vaguely embarrassing. Your letters begin to stack up. Some you write from scratch. Others are dictated to a scribe and then copied over in your own hand for appearances. You always sign them with the same practiced flourish. Your full name, your father's house, and the symbol you chose yourself. A sun with curling rays. It's meant to suggest brightness, warmth, the potential for growth. You hope it also makes people hesitate before underestimating you. Eventually you're assigned a private clerk to help manage your correspondence. He's older, with wispy hair and ink-stained fingers, and he calls you my lady, with genuine respect. You like him. He doesn't patronise you. Sometimes he lets you peek at the letters that come in before they're handed to your governess. That's how you learn which noblewomen admire your grace, and which think your portrait makes you look too proud. One day, a letter arrives from the Prince of Erinth himself. It's longer than expected. Thoughtful. He references a passage from one of your earlier notes, a line you barely remember writing about hawks and patience. He says he liked it, that it made him think. You read that part 4 times, heart thudding like a dropped goblet. You write back quickly, but not too quickly. You say something witty about falcons. You ask a polite question about his steward's health, your tutor's idea. You tuck a dried sprig of lavender between the pages and then immediately panic and remove it. You're not sure what gesture counts as too much. You settle for adding a line of poetry from a saint's hymn, one that can be interpreted as spiritual or romantic depending on who's reading. That's the thing about letters. They live in layers. The surface is clean, polite, polished, but underneath, messages coded in metaphor, warnings hidden in phrasing, compliments that double as threats. You're learning that what you say is never as important as how you say it, and what you don't say at all. Here's a curious fringe fact. In some royal households, letters were perfumed before sending. You haven't reached that level yet, but you've seen your mother do it, holding a scroll over a dish of frankincense, letting it absorb the scent of holiness or desire, depending on the intended recipient. You wonder what your scent would be, if you were allowed to choose. Lavender, maybe, or rain on stone. There's scholarly debate about how much control girls like you really had over these letters. Were they ghost-written, carefully scripted? Sometimes yes, but many were genuine. Some princesses wielded such influence through correspondence that entire wars were softened or sharpened by the phrasing in a single line. You imagine yourself doing that someday, writing a letter so sharp it cuts through silence. But for now, your letters are tools of flirtation and diplomacy. You write to the prince again. He responds, a little bolder this time. You smile. Your governess says nothing, but the corner of her mouth twitches when she reads it. He's well trained, she says, as he should be. And then you start practicing signatures in the margins of your notebooks, not changing your name, just altering how you write it, exploring what it would look like next to his. You pretend you're only doodling, but it feels like reaching forward into the fog and trying to trace the outline of your future. One evening your nurse finds you asleep at your desk, ink smudged across your cheek. She tucks you into bed without waking you, your latest letter half finished, the parchment curling like a secret waiting to be told. In the morning you'll write again. You always do. Because in a world where you own nothing, not your body, not your time, not even your breath, the words you choose are still yours, and sometimes they reach further than your feet ever will. You're 13 now, which is officially old enough for people to start speculating, loudly and often, about your future husband's face, or more accurately the condition of it, his face, his teeth, his temperament, and whether or not he walks with a cane, a limp, or just the heavy gait of someone who's already survived 2 fevers, 3 campaigns, and a failed rebellion. The whispers have become bold. In the hallways, in the garden, over your embroidery sessions, everyone suddenly has an opinion on how tolerable your marital fate will be. Let's hope he has all his fingers, one lady-in-waiting jokes, or at least the useful ones. You don't laugh. You can't, because you've seen the portraits. Not of him, he hasn't sent one, but of other noblemen who were once considered for you. And let's just say, they paint with a generous brush. If the brush were honest, half of those gallant suitors would look more like ghosts with beards. You've learned that no matter what they look like in oil and gold leaf, real life is rarely flattering. Especially when the man in question is nearly 30 and has seen more blood than sunlight. The Prince of Erenth, your current most likely, has not yet been confirmed as your husband. But the letters keep coming, and now there are rumours that his uncle is offering a new fleet of ships to sweeten the match. You try not to get your hopes up, but it's hard not to when your alternatives are less knight in shining armour, and more duke in declining health. You start to imagine what it would be like to be married to someone ugly. Not just plain, ugly. The kind of face that makes courtiers raise their eyebrows in pity, and scribes describe him as a man of unusual presence. You wonder if you'd be expected to look him in the eye, or worse, kiss him in public. You imagine meals with him, long silences punctuated by the sound of chewing. You imagine waking up beside him. The thought makes your stomach tighten like bad embroidery thread. And yet, you know it's not the worst fate. He could be cruel, or stupid, or boring. There are worse things than a face that makes you wince. A heart that makes you bleed is one of them. Here's a lovely little fringe fact. There are medieval love letters from queens to their husbands that express genuine affection, even passion. And there are others that read like hostage notes, carefully coded with phrases like, "I remain ever your humble wife," and "Your health is a gift to us all," which really means, "I hate it here, but I value survival." You wonder which kind of letter you'll be writing in a year, or 5. There's a feast held in honour of some visiting dignitaries, one of those vague peace-through-wine events your father favours. You're paraded out like fine china, dressed in gold brocade and a veil that weighs more than your evening meal. You're sat between 2 men. The one on your left is young and smug, with a chin like a fish, and breath that smells like boiled onions. The one on your right is old and quiet, with the dead-eyed look of a man who's seen too much and cared too little. You smile at both of them. You are polite, you fold your hands, you nod, and inside, you scream. After the feast, your mother pulls you aside. She says you made a good impression. "They noticed your elegance," she says. "Several of them expressed interest." You nod, as though that isn't the most horrifying sentence you've ever heard. In the privacy of your room, you stare at your reflection and try to imagine being kissed by someone whose name you haven't even been told yet. You wonder if you'll be allowed to look away. You wonder if he'll care. Your nurse says not to worry. "The Prince of Erinth seems kind," she says, pressing a warm cloth to your temple. "His letters are thoughtful." You nod, but words are easy. Faces are harder. Souls harder still. There's scholarly debate over how much appearance really mattered in royal marriages. Most historians agree, not much. A good alliance could forgive almost anything. Gout, halitosis, a lazy eye, even the occasional bout of insanity. None of these were deal-breakers if the dowry was strong and the lineage noble. Love? That was a bonus, like finding a jewel in your soup. Unexpected and possibly dangerous. You begin to catalogue what you could live with. A crooked nose, fine. A stammer, doable. Missing fingers, acceptable. But not cruelty, not stupidity. Not a man who speaks to you like you're his property instead of his partner. You'd rather live in exile or a nunnery, or even in the crumbling tower near the monastery with the bats and the view of the gallows. One night, a visiting lord tries to flirt with you. He's young, rich, and not hideous, but his words are slurred and his hand brushes your sleeve just a little too long. You excuse yourself with dignity, but the moment you're alone, you scrub your arm with a damp cloth until the skin goes pink. The next morning you receive another letter from Erinth. He asks about your music practice. He mentions the coming of spring. He ends with a line, "May our futures be better than our portraits." You laugh, genuinely, and then you panic because that means you're starting to hope, and hope is dangerous. Your governess warns you not to get attached. "The match isn't confirmed," she says. "He may yet be replaced." You nod, but part of you has already begun forming an image in your head. A face you've never seen, a voice you've never heard. You imagine he's not beautiful, but he's kind. You imagine he's not graceful, but he listens. You imagine he smells like cedar and lemon, not old horses and regret. You imagine things you shouldn't. That night you write a letter with more honesty than you should dare. You stop yourself halfway through, burn it, and start again. You replace every feeling with a flower. You bury your hopes in metaphors. You sign it with your usual sun. You still don't know what his face looks like. But you know yours is starting to crack under the pressure of pretending you don't care. Your wedding dress arrives in 6 separate crates. Each one opens with the reverence of a tomb being disturbed. The first contains silk, yards and yards of ivory so soft it makes your other dresses feel like burlap. The second holds the bodice, stiff and impossibly narrow. embroidered with golden vines that spiral like secrets around a heart that doesn't feel ready. The third box contains pearls, hundreds of them, to be sewn onto the sleeves in patterns so intricate they look like frost. The fourth, the veil, so long it trails like mist, edged with lace spun by nuns who've sworn not to speak, but apparently have a lot to say with needlework. The fifth is the train, 5 full lengths of fabric that must be carried by attendants. You don't even get to lift your own shadow. And the sixth, shoes. Slippers of dyed leather and velvet, soft as sin and already too small. You're 13, barely. Your hips have only just started to fill in. Your chest is still deciding what it wants to be. But no one waits for the body to catch up with the politics. The match has been finalised, the treaty signed, the feast date set, and the dress. The dress is here to remind you that your life is no longer about becoming, it's about arriving. You're sewn into it days in advance for fittings, literally sewn, the back stitched closed by a team of women who mutter prayers while adjusting the seams. You stand still for hours while they smooth, tighten, pin, repeat. You're not allowed to sit or speak. Your governess says it helps train the body for grace. You think it's more like embalming, but you don't say so out loud. And then come the accessories, a crownlet of silver and sapphires, delicate but heavy enough to press your thoughts to the floor, gloves with tiny pearl buttons that take 3 people to fasten, a belt, jewelled, symbolic, and utterly useless. You're told it represents virtue. You think it feels more like a leash. There's a strange, horrible historical fact. Some medieval wedding gowns were lined with charms sewn into the seams, saints' medallions, scraps of parchment with blessings, even bone fragments from holy relics, all meant to protect the bride from evil, or infertility, or herself. You ask if yours has any. Your nurse hesitates, then whispers that there's a tiny scrap of your mother's veil tucked into the lining, stitched near your heart. She won't say why. You're afraid to ask. The dress weighs nearly 40 pounds. You try not to flinch when you put it on. The minute it's laced, you can't breathe properly. Every breath feels like borrowed time. You're told that's normal. Beauty demands sacrifice, your governess says, adjusting a pleat like your ribs aren't screaming. The dress is a message. You ask what message. She replies, that you are ready. You don't feel ready, not even close. The day before the wedding, you spend an hour alone in the chapel. You kneel until your knees go numb, staring at the crucifix, trying to understand what it is you're supposed to be preparing for. A life? A role? A slow and inevitable unravelling? You pray, sort of. You ask God for something vague. Courage, maybe. Or escape. Or just a little air. Later that night, your nurse brings you a cup of warm milk and tells you a story about a princess who fainted at her own wedding because the weight of her dress broke her collarbone. You stare at your reflection in the polished brass mirror and wonder which bone will be the first to give. Your governess walks you through the schedule again. The procession, the vows, the blessing, the bedding ceremony. You flinch at that part. She pretends not to notice. You ask her if she was afraid before her wedding. She says, yes, but I was also practical. You ask if you can be both. She doesn't answer. There's scholarly debate over how involved brides were in the planning of their own weddings. Some sources suggest they were mere ornaments, moved like chess pieces from one display to the next. Others describe brides who asserted themselves, chose colours, requested specific hymns. You're not given such choices. Your colours were chosen months ago. Your hymns assigned. Your procession rehearsed without you. On the morning of the ceremony, you wake before dawn. You're bathed in rosewater and wrapped in linen. Your hair is braided, coiled, and pinned into a shape that makes your scalp ache. Your face is powdered just slightly to even your complexion. You're not allowed to cry. That would cause swelling and puffiness. The dress goes on last. It takes nearly 2 hours to secure. By the time you're fully dressed, you can barely lift your arms. You try to smile. It feels like a lie written across your mouth. As you wait in the corridor outside the chapel, your mother approaches. She looks radiant. regal, remote. She kisses your forehead and straightens your veil. "You're doing well," she says. You nod. She adds, "After this, it gets easier." You don't believe her, but you appreciate the attempt. The music begins, the doors open, you step forward. The world blurs, everything slows. You're aware of your heartbeat, of the rustle of fabric, of the collective inhale of the gathered nobles as you appear. You see your future husband at the altar. He looks nervous, but not cruel. His face is not hideous, not beautiful either. Human, just human. And you think, maybe. You walk. Your steps are measured, not just because of the weight, but because of the meaning. Every step is a nail in the coffin of your old life. Every step is a contract, a sacrifice, a beginning. When you reach the altar, he takes your hand. His palm is warm. His fingers are trembling. That surprises you. You think, we're both pretending then. The priest begins to speak. You don't listen, you just breathe, and pray the dress holds. It happens quietly, which is the most shocking part of all. No fireworks, no crashing cymbals, no great swelling of music. Just a kiss, brief and dry and ceremonial, and then it's done. You're no longer a daughter, you are a wife. You're not sure when exactly the line was crossed, but here you are, standing beside a man who is technically your husband, your hand still tingling from the pressure of his, your mouth a stiff curve beneath your veil. You want to laugh or maybe scream, but instead you smile and curtsy, because you've been trained for this exact moment since before you knew what the word marriage even meant. The applause that follows is delicate. No cheering, of course. This is a holy rite, not a tournament, but the rustling of fabrics, the murmured blessings, the subtle glances exchanged across the pews all speak volumes. The court is watching, always watching. You don't just belong to your husband now, you belong to them. A symbol, a spectacle, a new chess piece placed on the board with calculated grace. The feast begins shortly after. It's grand, of course. Glittering with gold and heavy with roasted meat, glazed fruits, and wine that flows like someone's trying to drown the entire idea of subtlety. There's a boar with an apple in its mouth, a tower of sugared almonds, and a roast swan served with its neck elegantly curved, as if it hadn't been murdered and stuffed by a pastry chef with too much flair. Musicians play in the gallery, and dancers fill the space with movement that feels more rehearsed than joyful. And through it all you sit beside your new husband, performing a kind of quiet perfection. He's trying, you'll give him that. He offers you morsels from his plate, says a few soft things about the embroidery on your sleeves, compliments your posture. You murmur polite replies and try not to look like you're calculating the number of steps it would take to flee the hall. He seems ordinary, not cruel, not dazzling. Just a man in a doublet with tired eyes and ink stains on his fingers. That's the strangest part. You've built him up in your head. Imagined him as a towering stranger, or a romantic hero, or a beast disguised as a man. But instead, he's just a person. And that almost makes it worse. Because if he were monstrous, you could hate him. But if he's just kind and distant and trying, what then? There's a historical fringe custom you remember from your tutoring. In some medieval courts, the bedding ceremony was public. Not in the full, horrifying sense, but witnessed. Clergy and noble guests escorting the couple to the bedchamber, handing them symbolic gifts like wine, nuts, or belts, and then waiting outside while the marriage was consummated. A polite word for something terrifying. Sometimes they'd hear a cry and call it good. Sometimes they waited for blood-stained sheets as proof. You're told yours will be semi-private, which is its own kind of horror. When the feast winds down, you're helped from your seat, your veil removed, your hair unpinned. The women around you coo and smile and smooth your sleeves like, this is the happiest day of your life. They call you lady now, and it feels like a joke you're not in on. Your mother appears briefly to kiss your cheek and say something vague like, be gracious. You want to ask her what that means. You want to ask if she was ever afraid, but she's already walking away. Your husband, meets you at the foot of the staircase. He doesn't touch you. Just offers a crooked smile and says, "Shall we?" You follow him up. The chamber is warm, lit with 100 candles. There are flowers everywhere, white lilies, lavender, sprigs of rosemary, and someone has scattered rose petals across the sheets, like they think this will distract you from the fact that you're about to be expected to surrender your body. You want to run, or vomit, or vanish entirely, but instead you stand there as the door closes and everything goes quiet. And here's the debate, the big, awful, unresolved debate. How much say did medieval princesses really have when it came to the marriage bed? Some historians argue that noble brides were passive participants, expected to submit, not to speak. Others insist that behind closed doors many negotiated, delayed, even manipulated. It depended on the man, the culture, the timing, the mood. You don't know which category you'll fall into. He pours you wine, offers it without pressure, says gently, "This doesn't have to be tonight." You blink. Did you hear him right? He repeats it slower. "We can wait if you prefer." For a second you forget how to breathe. You nod quickly, grateful. "Thank you," you whisper. He looks relieved too. "You're still young," he says, then adds, a little awkwardly, "I'm not in the habit of terrifying girls." You almost laugh, not because it's funny, but because the wave of tension that breaks in your chest is so sudden it feels like falling. You sit on the edge of the bed while he settles into a chair near the hearth. You drink your wine. He drinks his. For a while you talk. About nothing mostly. He tells you about the journey from Erinth. You tell him a small story about your tutor and a goat. He laughs. The fire crackles, and for the first time since you stepped into that gown, you feel like maybe, just maybe, you're not entirely alone in this. He falls asleep in the chair. You stay awake longer, staring at the firelight playing across the carved beams of the ceiling. You touch the rose petals scattered near your feet, and wonder if anyone will ask why the sheets are still clean come morning. Probably not. Not with the treaty signed and the wine already drunk. You lie back, still in your wedding dress, too tired to remove it, too afraid of what comes next to undress alone. But at least tonight you get to rest. And in this world, that's more than most girls like you can hope for. The first morning you wake up married, nothing feels different. Not at first. The fire has burned down to a faint orange glow. The room smells like half-wilted roses and old ash, and your body is stiff from sleeping in layers of ceremonial fabric that were never meant to survive the night. You sit up slowly, as if the air itself is heavier now, brushing the petals off your lap one by one. Your husband, yes, husband, still a strange word, snores softly in the chair across the room, his head tilted back at an awkward angle that makes him look, briefly, like a statue that's lost interest in being admired. You half expect someone to burst in with a trumpet or a tray of congratulatory pastries, but instead it's your nurse, quiet and steady as always, who arrives. She gives you a once-over, her expression unreadable. Then she says, "No one will ask questions," and begins the meticulous process of unlacing you from yesterday's skin. The dress peels off like memory, slow and sticky. It smells different now, like nerves and candle smoke and something else you can't quite name. Once you're out of it, you feel naked, even in your chemise, like you've been peeled open, like you've become something other than girl and not quite woman. You slip into a simpler gown, your body sore in strange places, not from touch, but from tension. Downstairs the castle is already alive. Breakfasts are being prepared, alliances whispered over meat pies and honeyed figs. You're escorted, not led, not shoved, but gently escorted, into the morning like a guest at your own coronation. Everyone calls you lady, now with a crispness that wasn't there before, a sharpness at the edges like they're not sure yet how to hold you. Your husband joins you a little later at the morning meal. He looks more awake, more composed, though his hair is slightly mussed and his collar's wrinkled. He doesn't speak much, just nods at your plate to ask if you've eaten enough. You offer a faint smile and lie. You've barely touched anything, but your stomach feels like it's been replaced with wet rope. As part of the wedding rites, you're expected to present yourself to the court again, this time as a married woman. The walk into the hall feels different, slower. There's no veil now, no excuse to hide behind lace and perfume. Your hair is worn in the style of a bride, braided and looped with ribbon, and everyone sees it. Everyone sees you. There's a subtle shift in the way they look at you. Not just the men, though some of them now glance with a flicker of assessment, like you're something claimed, but the women too. Some are sympathetic, others calculating. One lady, a distant cousin of your husband, gives you a nod that's almost a bow. It's faint, but it means something. She sees you as part of the game now, and you are. There's a quirky little fact you once read during your studies. In some courts, newly married couples were expected to present a poem or a performance during their first banquet together, something symbolic of their union. You're grateful your court has no such tradition, because you have no idea what you'd even say. A poem about two strangers trying not to suffocate under a mountain of silk. The rest of the day moves like fog. You're shown the rooms that are now yours, a solar filled with tapestries, a bedchamber technically shared but with its own private door, a study with a desk you'll barely use but must keep tidy for appearance. Your possessions have been moved quietly, efficiently, and disturbingly fast. It's as if you never had another life at all. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether noblewomen after marriage gained power or lost it. Some argue that becoming a wife gave women control over their own households, financial influence, and the ability to manipulate court politics through subtle manoeuvring. Others insist it was the beginning of a slow suffocation, a shift from visible princess to invisible partner, her name now always spoken second, always in the possessive. You're not sure yet which category you'll fall into, but the walls feel closer than they did before. In the afternoon, you're visited by the court seamstress. She takes your measurements again, now that you're no longer just a maiden but a wife with duties. That's how she puts it. The way she says duties makes your spine itch. You're offered new gowns, new colours, new embroidery options. You choose green, not because you love it, but because it feels alive, growing. Later your husband finds you in the solar. He knocks first. That surprises you. He doesn't stay long. He brings you a book, old, leather-bound, the kind that smells like damp wood and forgotten thoughts. "I thought you might like it," he says. "You mentioned you enjoyed fables." He doesn't smile exactly, but something in his voice is softer than you expect. You take the book and nod. It's a small gesture, but it feels like a crack in a wall that might someday be a door. That night you dine alone. He's called away to discuss something with his advisors. You don't ask what. You're not sure if it's your place yet. You sit by the fire, the book open in your lap, but you can't read it. Your mind drifts to the past, to the day before, to the moment you walked through that chapel door and felt every eye on your back, to the look in your father's eyes when he handed you over, to the way your husband's fingers trembled slightly when he held your hand. You think, this is it. This is where I live now. This is who I am now. And you're not sad. Not exactly. You're just adjusting, which is what women like you do. The transition from princess to lady of the court is slow, sticky, and utterly filled with protocol. If marriage was the plunge, this is the swim. You flailing in unfamiliar waters, trying not to sink in silks too heavy for survival. There are new rules now, dozens of them. You thought you knew court life before, how to walk, where to sit, which fork not to use, but being a wife reassigns your place in the hierarchy, like someone's shuffled all the cards and now you're a queen of a suit you never asked to play. You're no longer expected to curtsy to certain people. Others, you must curtsy lower. Some women who once called you my lady now call you sister, which feels more like a challenge than a compliment. And the men, they nod with a different kind of weight now, less reverent. more knowing. You can feel it in the way they look at you. Not quite lascivious, but no longer innocent. You've crossed a line. You're touched. Even if the touching was symbolic. Even if the only thing your husband touched that first night was his goblet of wine. You find yourself under constant surveillance, not by guards, but by the watching eyes of the women who sit in corners with embroidery hoops and never miss a thing. They notice how often you smile, how often you don't, whether you reach for your husband's arm or keep a careful inch between your sleeve and his. They note if you speak to men too freely, if your laughter rises too loud, if your gaze lingers too long on someone who is not your lord. And now there's talk of heirs, already. You're 13 and people are asking if your courses have started. Politely, of course, couched in euphemisms like the signs of womanhood or the turning of the moon. Your nurse fields the questions with a stern look and a curt "not yet," but you know the gossip has begun. And with gossip comes pressure. You start to hear the phrases that will haunt you for years. Securing the line, stability of succession, ensuring peace through blood. You're not just a wife, you're a vessel, an egg in a jewelled shell, a prophecy in waiting. There's a disturbing fringe custom you read about once. In certain noble courts, midwives would search newlywed bed sheets for signs of virgin blood, not just for proof, but as a kind of omen. If the stain was too faint or worse, absent, it could spark rumours, even annulments. Some brides reportedly pricked their fingers and stained the sheets themselves. Others fainted to avoid scrutiny. You don't know if it's true, but the fact that it could be is enough to make your skin crawl. You're grateful, at least, that your husband isn't rushing you. After that first night, he's remained kind but distant. He visits you often enough to maintain appearances, but he never pushes. Sometimes you eat together. Sometimes you don't. He brings you little things. Books, sweets, a carved wooden comb from a visiting envoy. You begin to wonder if this is what marriage is supposed to feel like. A kind of quiet companionship. Or maybe just a very elaborate truce. The question of children looms over everything. Your governess starts casually asking how you're feeling each morning. Your maids whisper when you wince from a cramp or skip a meal. The cook sends you broth instead of wine. Even your mother writes letters asking if there is good news. You want to scream, or vanish, or write back that your body is not a harvest field, and everyone can stop measuring your stomach like it's a damn moon. There's scholarly debate over the age at which medieval noblewomen bore children. Some were mothers at 14, others waited depending on health, fertility, and political need. You've heard the stories. Some girls died in childbirth before they even knew how to lace a bodice. Others survived a dozen births, only to die of a cold at 35. You wonder where you'll fall on that spectrum. You hope, quietly, guiltily, that it won't be soon. But hope is a dangerous thing, especially when it looks like defiance. So you go about your duties, you attend court functions, nod graciously at poets, pretend to care about hawking schedules and the annual grape harvest. You write letters to distant cousins. You visit the poor with your husband's aunt and give them bread and polite smiles. You learn the names of your new servants. You learn the layout of the castle. You learn how to say "I'm fine" in a way that sounds believable even to you. Sometimes, in the evenings, you and your husband play chess. He lets you win. You pretend not to notice. One night he asks if you're happy. The question knocks the air from your lungs. You look at him. His eyes are tired, but kind. His voice is calm. You realise he isn't just asking for courtesy. He's asking because he doesn't know. Because he wants to know. You think for a moment. "I'm learning," you say. He nods. "So am I." That's the closest you've come to honesty with anyone in weeks. There's a strange freedom in being married to someone who doesn't pretend to have all the answers. You start to relax. Just a little. You begin to think maybe this is survivable. Not romantic, not thrilling, but survivable. You're still watched, still whispered about, still measured by cycles your body hasn't yet begun, but you are also reading again. And sometimes at night you sleep without dreaming, and that for now feels like something close to peace. It's a strange thing to wake up one morning and realise your body's not your own anymore. You knew it, of course, intellectually. They told you, your governess, your mother, your nurse, the priest, the midwife with the grey braid and no patience for tears. Your body is for your husband, they said, for your children, for the realm. But it's different when it happens, when it really happens, when you miss your monthly bleeding and the whispers start before you've even said the words aloud. You're 14 now, barely, and pregnant. The word echoes around your head like a bell rung too close to your ear. It doesn't sound like a blessing no matter how many times they say it is. You don't feel holy. You feel swollen, dizzy, like a balloon tied to a stone. The physician confirms it with a brisk nod and a checklist of signs. Sore breasts, nausea, fatigue, a restless, fluttering pressure in your belly that isn't quite pain but isn't not pain either. You nod along like a good girl, like a princess should. You don't tell him about the way your dreams have turned sour, filled with drowning rooms and screaming infants wrapped in velvet. The news spreads before you've even changed clothes. The entire court erupts in delight. The lineage is secure, the succession is blessed, the stars have smiled. You're paraded again, congratulated again, kissed on both cheeks by women you barely know and saluted with toasts that taste like vinegar. Your husband smiles a little too much. You can tell he's relieved. His house is safe, his position strengthened, his gamble on a young bride already paying off. No one asks how you feel, not really. Your nurse is the only one who dares speak plainly. It's early, she says one night, brushing your hair back from your forehead. A lot can happen. You don't ask what she means. You already know. There's a gruesome historical fact that hovers in your thoughts like smoke. Many noblewomen in the Middle Ages died during their first pregnancy. Some didn't survive the second trimester. Others made it to childbirth and bled out on linen sheets while priests mumbled prayers over their cooling bodies. And some lived, only to lose the child. Or worse, give birth to a daughter and be told to try again. You're both terrified and expected to be thrilled. There's an audience for your pregnancy. That's the most surreal part. A rotating cast of ladies, midwives, advisors, and well-meaning strangers who monitor your food, your movement, your sleep. You're forbidden from riding, climbing stairs too quickly, laughing too hard, or eating anything from the river. You're given soft shoes, loose gowns, and bitter-smelling tonics. Your chamber is rearranged to make space for the coming baby, as if its arrival is already guaranteed. You start talking to it, quietly, late at night when no one is listening. You whisper things like, "Please be safe, please be strong, please don't hurt me too much." Sometimes you feel silly. Other times, it feels like the only honest moment of your day. There's a ceremonial side to this, of course. A blessing from the bishop, an offering made on your behalf at the abbey, the burning of special herbs in your room to ward off evil spirits, or complications. You try not to inhale too deeply. The scent makes you gag. So do boiled eggs, roasted lamb, and the sight of your husband's beard when it's slightly damp from his morning wash. The open scholarly debate on medieval childbirth comes into focus now. Some claim noblewomen had access to the best care available. Trained midwives, special herbs, experienced nurses. Others argue it made little difference. A rich woman could still die just as quickly as a poor one. The uterus, after all, doesn't care about status. You keep a ledger now, a habit you picked up to pass the time. Not of finances, though those are being tracked closely by men in fancier boots than you've ever owned, but of your own symptoms, cravings, pains, dreams, names. You've started listing names in the margins, girls' names, boys' names, names from saints and poems and old stories. You know you won't get to choose, but the act of writing them feels like carving a secret corner for yourself inside this public spectacle. Your husband is gentle, still. He visits often, reads to you sometimes, leaves when you're too tired to pretend you're listening. He touches your hand instead of your waist now. He says things like, "You're doing well," and "they say it will be a boy." He doesn't ask what you think. No one does. At night, your dreams get stranger. You see yourself holding a baby wrapped in white, but its face is blank, smooth as marble. Other times, you dream of yourself in the chapel again, only this time the veil is over your mouth, not your hair. The midwife checks your pulse every other day. She pokes your belly, frowns, smiles, frowns again. Strong heartbeat, she mutters once. You cling to those 2 words for an entire week, and then, one morning, you wake up bleeding. Just a little. Just enough to make you go cold all over. You don't scream. You just sit there, numb, until your nurse finds you. The castle swirls into action. Physicians, herbs, holy water. You're confined to bed. Your pulse is checked every hour. Your sheets are inspected like crime scenes. And you wait. You wait, hour after hour, to see if the bleeding will stop. If the baby will hold on. If your body is strong enough. If the saints are in a good mood. If you'll still be called blessed tomorrow. There's nothing you can do but lie still and let the world happen to you. And for once, no one in the castle is celebrating. It takes 3 days to know for sure. 3 long, aching days where you don't move unless someone moves you, don't eat unless someone places food in your hand, don't speak unless someone asks you something, and even then, you barely answer. You stare at the carved ceiling beams of your bedchamber and try not to imagine the shape you were starting to become. Your belly had barely begun to rise, like the soft swell of bread just before it bakes, and yet it had felt enormous, monumental even. And now it's just you again, small, hollow. The ache in your body doesn't compare to the silence in your chest. The bleeding stops eventually, you survive, but the baby doesn't. No one says that word, baby. They say loss, they say mishap, they say sadness, in the same voice they'd use to comment on the weather. It's raining. The pregnancy ended. The pheasant was dry at supper. All things to be noted and moved past. Only your nurse dares to say it plainly, whispering, "The child is gone," as she holds your hand that night, gently rubbing your fingers like it might warm something that's already turned to ice inside you. The court goes quiet for a day. A few murmured condolences, a few cautious glances. Your mother sends a letter. It says, "Rest, another will come." As if children are something summoned like meals or messengers. As if your womb is a schedule and you've simply missed an appointment. Your husband doesn't say much either. He sits beside your bed, holds your hand for a while, and offers small words like pebbles. You did nothing wrong. It happens. We'll try again. It's meant to be comforting. You know that. But you can feel how much of it is for him, not you. He's disappointed, yes. But more than that, he's uncomfortable. Death is supposed to be clean when it's far away. This one is too close, too quiet, too bloody. There's a dark little historical reality few like to dwell on. Noble women in the Middle Ages were expected to bear children, often and without complaint. But when pregnancies failed, and many did, it was rarely mourned the way we think of mourning now. A miscarriage was a setback, not a tragedy, an inconvenience for the court, a problem for the lineage. Unless you made it to birth, alive and screaming, you didn't count. Still, your body knows, and it grieves. The midwife visits each morning. She checks your pulse, your colour, your belly. She tells you your uterus is cleansing itself. You stare at her blankly. Your body feels like a crime scene. Everything tender, fragile, wrong. Your appetite doesn't return for a while. Neither does your sleep. You drift in and out of restless half-dreams. Your hands covered in ink and blood. Your cradle rocking itself. Your father's voice saying, "Try again, try again, try again," like it's a hymn. After a week they let you leave your bed. You walk like a ghost. The halls feel too wide now, too bright. People don't look at you the same way anymore. The admiration has faded. You've slipped a little down the invisible ladder of worth. You had one job, bear a healthy heir, and already you've failed. You're still married, still technically beloved. But there's a new silence now, a crack that no one wants to talk about. There's a scholarly debate about whether noblewomen could recover their influence after losing a child. Some did, especially if they eventually had more. Others fell from favour, quietly sidelined, their unfruitfulness seen as a spiritual defect. Some were even replaced, or sent to live out their days in obscure corners of castles with nothing but tapestries and old books to keep them company. You don't know yet which path is yours. Your husband is kinder than you expect. He gives you space, doesn't ask you to smile or play music or attend banquets. For a few days you're allowed to simply be, a girl with hollow eyes and a body trying to forget. He leaves a new book on your pillow. You don't open it, but you notice the title, On the Nature of Hope. Eventually you're summoned to the chapel. It's a quiet service. Just you, the chaplain, and the priest who blessed your marriage. There's incense, low chanting, the smell of wax and something darker. You kneel. The priest says a prayer, something about cleansing, something about sorrow, something about starting again. You keep your eyes closed and imagine the sound of the wind in your childhood garden. Not this place, not this pain. On the walk back, your nurse says, "This isn't your fault." You nod, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like everything is your fault, because you are the body where the child should have grown. You are the body that failed to carry. You are the mother of nothing, and everyone is waiting for you to try again. Your governess starts asking when you'd like to resume your duties. There are letters to write, guests to acknowledge, tapestries to approve. You nod. You go through the motions. You reply to distant duchesses with phrases like "in these quiet days of reflection," and your prayers are appreciated, even though you didn't ask for any prayers, and the days have not been quiet. They've been screaming inside your head. There's a strange, bitter irony to the way people start calling you strong, like it's a compliment, like endurance is something you chose. They mean well. But the truth is, you're not strong. You're just still here, because you don't have the luxury of falling apart. One night, you walk alone through the old gallery. The paintings of queens from generations past line the walls. You stare at their perfect faces, their flat gazes, their porcelain hands holding invisible burdens. You wonder how many of them had days like yours, how many smiled through emptiness, how many screamed in silence. You look at them and think, I see you now, and maybe, just maybe, they see you too. You don't know what comes next, but for now you are alive, and sometimes that has to be enough. You never become fearless, but you do become fluent. In grief, in duty, in the slow, quiet language of power that doesn't come with a crown, but with the endurance of surviving things no one claps for. Months pass. The court moves on. You're no longer the centre of attention, which frankly feels like relief stitched in silk. Your womb is still discussed behind fans and in shadowed alcoves, of course, but your name has slipped a few notches down the gossip lists. The nobles have new scandals. The kitchens have new recipes. Even your husband has started attending council meetings with more frequency and fewer glances back at your chair. You exist in the space between roles now. Not quite the innocent bride, not yet the formidable matron. You're becoming someone else, and it's not a role anyone prepared you for. No one tells you what to do when your body has failed. Your hopes have cracked, and yet the crownless weight of your title still rests on your shoulders every morning. So you invent yourself, day by day. Like a slow-burning alchemist working with lead and memory, you start with small things. You return to your books, not just the fables and saints' tales you once loved, but the practical ones. Histories, politics, land ledgers, the dry stuff. The things your tutors never really meant for you to pay attention to. You read about trade routes and harvest taxes and whose cousin once tried to claim a duchy by marrying his own aunt. You begin to understand that power in court doesn't always wear armour or carry a sceptre. Sometimes it wears a pleasant smile and knows when to pause before speaking. You learn to write letters that don't just flatter, but direct. Not commands, of course, not yet, but suggestions. invitations, strategic compliments that nudge conversations your way. You start writing to other ladies in distant courts, especially the older ones, the widows, the abbesses, women with hidden influence. You flatter their wisdom, ask for advice, build alliances like a spider spins silk. No one notices at first. Then they do. Your husband mentions it lightly. You're building quite the correspondence. You just smile and say, "There's not much else to do while waiting." Waiting? Yes, that word again. They're all still waiting, for your body to rise again with purpose, for the next child, for the next announcement. But you no longer think of yourself as just a waiting room for a dynasty. You're not a vessel. You're a presence, a mind, a chess player learning the weight of each piece, even the pawns. There's a quirky historical fact about one princess who, after her fourth miscarriage, decided to stop participating in public court life entirely. Instead, she set up a small salon in her private apartments and invited philosophers, herbalists and scandalous poets to hold discussions behind closed doors. Some say it was eccentric, others believe it was the early shape of a political salon, decades ahead of its time. You think about her sometimes, how they probably whispered about her too, how they might have missed that she was shifting power without moving a muscle. Your husband begins to trust you more openly. He starts asking your opinion on small things, staff appointments, wine tariffs, how to handle a visiting count who won't stop comparing his dog to a bishop. You answer thoughtfully, carefully, never too boldly, always with a gentle tilt of the head, a word like perhaps. But your advice is good, and he starts to rely on it. Even brings you into a council meeting once, just as an observer, of course, but afterward asks what you thought of the debate. You tell him honestly. He listens. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much influence queens and noblewomen actually wielded behind the scenes in medieval courts. Some argue it was minimal, an illusion. Others point to letters, records, decisions that clearly bore the fingerprints of a woman's insight. You've seen both sides now. You know that power, for someone like you, lives in the pauses, in what's not said, in the way your gaze lingers just long enough to make someone nervous. You haven't bled since the miscarriage, and that is in its own way both frightening and freeing. The physicians have no answers. They poke and prod and prescribe, but no child comes. And slowly the court stops asking. The whispers fade, or perhaps they just move further underground, into corners you've learned not to walk past when alone. Some believe you're cursed, others suspect your husband. A few even call it punishment for something no one can name. You carry all of it with a straight back and clean gloves. And then, just when the world seems to have reshaped itself into something still and predictable, you are widowed. It happens quickly. A fever, 3 days, no air, no warning. You sit beside him as he burns, his breath ragged and wet, his skin flushed with that waxy colour that always comes before death. He looks at you, really looks at you, and says, "I thought we'd have more time." You squeeze his hand. You don't say anything because you've already learned that most goodbyes are silent. He dies before dawn, and now you are something new again. A widow. Widowhood in the Middle Ages was a strange blend of loss and liberation. Some women were shoved into convents, others remarried within the year, like changing boots between seasons. But a select few, especially those with no heir and a substantial dowry returned, gained a rare thing, freedom, not just to move, but to rule. And you fall into the latter. You're 16 years old, and for the first time in your life you're no longer someone's daughter, no longer someone's bride, no longer someone's potential mother. You're simply you, and it terrifies everyone. So now you're here, older, not old, but aged in the way only court life and grief and politics can accomplish. You've survived it all. Birth in a cold castle, your first wooden doll, your first corset, your first terrifying kiss, a wedding dress that nearly broke your spine, and a child that never arrived but still left a mark. You've outlived your husband, you've outmaneuvered expectations, and now you stand at the edge of something rare, true independence, wrapped in mourning black and the kind of silence people mistake for fragility. But you know better. You know what your silence can do. You wake when you want to now. You write letters not just in reply but in command. Your seal is respected. Your words ripple through the courts like rumours with sharp teeth. You've become the woman others write about cautiously in their own correspondence. She's clever, perhaps too clever. They watch you closely. They wonder if you'll remarry, if you'll retreat, if you'll scheme. And you smile because they still don't understand. You don't need to do anything. You're already winning by simply remaining. History may not remember your name, not unless you write it somewhere bold. But you've learned how to survive in a world that was built to cage you, and in surviving, you've rewritten the script just a little for the next girl, the next bride, the next princess born into politics and velvet and iron. You still light a candle every year on the day you would have been a mother. You still sometimes dream of running, not away, just somewhere else. But then you wake, and you are still here, unmarried, unclaimed, and finally wonderfully free.